Hey, you. Don't touch that dial. Don't skip forward past this intro, because I got something to tell you. And I'm going to tell you right now. So are you ready? Because here we go. Did you know that we have a Patreon page? It's true. We've got a Patreon page, and I'd like to thank some of the amazing patrons that help support us putting out the content that we love to do and that you love to hear. So, without further ado, thank you to Dustin Miller, Chris Copleen, Dave Jackson, Charlie Young, Cody Dawson, Eric Guess, Colby Moyer, Ryan Yingling, Masked Llama, aka Poppy the Keaton, and Nick Fakori. I hope I said that right, Nick, of the Friday Night Gamecast. I want to say thank you to all of these wonderful people who have decided to help support the show. If you want to be like them, you can check out what we have to offer at patreon.com/pixelprojectradio. We have a variety of tiers to choose from, and for as little as $2, that's right, just $2, you can get some great benefits, including bonus episodes, our schedule 2 months in advance, and voting privileges to choose the content that we put out for you. There are also some higher tiers with more goodies attached to them, but again, you can find all of this at patreon.com/pixelprojectradio. Now, in the words of Dionysus, that's real groovy, man, but let's get on to the episode, eh, Zag? That was more David Bowie. Whatever, you know what I mean. Let's go to the episode. On to Hades. Welcome back to Pixel Project Radio, a video game discussions podcast where we talk all about the games that we love and the games that you love too. It's me. You can't get away. There is no escape. I'm your host, Rick Firestone.
He's always there. He is inevitable.
It's true. It's true. I am inevitable. And that mellifluous tone that you just heard was from one of the 2 guests that I have on today. That's right. For the price of 1, you're getting 3. Well, we'll workshop the fancy sayings. But today I am joined by 2 good podcasting friends, Nick and Will from Friday Night Gamecast. Lads, how's it going?
It's going really well. Thank you so much for having us on, Rick. It is an honor to be here. Longtime fan of Pixel Project Radio and all of the work that you and Ben have done. So I'm really excited to be on today, and even more excited to have my best friend and co-host with me, William.
He's back. Hey guys, so it's great being here. Thanks once again. Just reiterating that, Rick, it's nice to be on here. I'm looking forward to once again continuing my comeback tour as we ride into one of my favorite games.
It's good to have you. It's good to have both of you. We Nick and I just talked recently on an episode of your show, an episode talking about Xenosaga and my boring life, and it was a lot of fun. So I'm excited to have both of you here, the duo, the gruesome twosome, together at last with me.
I have to say, like, now that the Xenosaga episode is out, Rick, I am over the moon, and I don't want to plug it any more than we already have here, but I do have to give kudos to you, Rick, because introducing me to Yasunori Mitsuda and his work and everything, we talked a little bit about it on Discord. I'm just over the moon at how good that OST is. You're gonna make me act up and buy a CRT, a PS2, and a copy of Xenosaga so I can play this game.
Oh, well, pal, good luck with that. Xenosaga 1 is pretty easy to come by, but if you want to play the whole trilogy, let's just say 3 is going to cost you a pretty penny.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
But you're right, Yasunori Mitsuda, phenomenal composer. Xenosaga is not even my favorite OST of his. I think Xenogears and Chrono Trigger blow it out of the water.
Well, Chrono Trigger, of course.
I did some more reading into all of the work that he did on Chrono Trigger, and just all of it was so funny because I was reading, and this is just a quick aside on Yasunori, like, it was so interesting. I was reading about him interviewing for Square. He saw some ad pop up in a magazine, and he went to the one and only Nobuo Uematsu at Square and started interviewing him, and they were talking, like, going through the process. And during that interview, he was like, yeah, I'm just looking at Square as a stepping stone in my career. I'm not really looking to do much beyond that. And like Uematsu, and I don't know who else he had with him at the point. They were kind of just like flabbergasted, like, who is this kid? What is he talking about? But they hired him anyway, and he started just doing sound engineering before even composition. And then his first big break was Chrono Trigger. I thought that was it was so cool. It's so funny to learn more about him.
Yeah, it's it's such an interesting story. And then obviously everything that happened on Chrono Trigger. And we won't get into that now because little spoiler alert, if you like Chrono Trigger, we've got 2 episodes on it. How about that?
Ooh,
how's that
nice.
for a plug? but I love talking to both of you, but we do have an agenda to get to today. We are not talking about Chrono Trigger. We're not talking about Yasunori Mitsuda. None of that. We're not talking about JRPGs. We are talking about an action roguelike game that came out just a couple years ago in 2020, Hades. So let's get into it. What is Hades? As I just said, it's an action roguelike run-based game. It tells the story of Zagreus, the son of Hades, as he tries to attempt to escape the underworld. You're going to meet tons of characters from Greek mythology, Olympic gods, chthonic gods, others, and you'll find out what their role in the story is. Now, if you're a new listener to the show, first of all, welcome. We're really glad that you're here. We're really glad if you're a returning listener as well. But for new listeners, how this is going to go is we tend to give a short TLDR review at the very top just to get our feelings out of the way. And then we're going to continue through the development history, the visuals, the mechanics, the music, all of that. Typically, we end with the story, and we're going to do that here as well. But this isn't a story-heavy game like, let's say, Chrono Trigger or, let's say, Xenosaga. So that will be a little more abbreviated. It'll be a little more freeform, but we'll still touch on it. Sound good? Great.
Sounds
I'm
great
glad
to me.
you think so. It was a rhetorical question for the listeners, but for the audience.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Perfect.
But I am glad that you guys are okay with it too.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into it. Our TLDR review of this game. I'm going to go first for once, and here's what I've got. A run-based roguelike and Greek mythology seem fated to be together, and it was Supergiant to first make it happen in Hades. While its bag of tricks isn't as deep as others in the genre and can feel unnecessarily bloated, Hades provides an addictive gameplay loop accompanied by an endearing art style and sound design that make the at times maddening runs all the more enjoyable. I'm a big fan of this game, boys. I really like it.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm. You can feel the love in that.
Nick, do you want to go next?
Absolutely. Are you a baby roguelike player? If so, this can be baby's first roguelike that you're going to fall in love with. Everything that is here for the Greek mythology, whether or not you know more about Greek mythology than others, this is going to be just enough to get you in and get your feet wet to understanding the lore of these characters that you're going to come across. Hades is a game that is surprisingly deep, and the more you play it, the more you're incentivized to learn about that universe that they set you in. It is clean, it is simple, and every time you die, it's almost like death is a welcome to go back to the House of Hades to learn more about your father and everything, all of the other characters that are within this game. So this is going to be a big one for me. I'm going to give this a solid 9.5 Skellies out of 10.
Oh, no, you read ahead in the notes. That was going to be a surprise. Okay, so you said, what was it, 9.5 Skellies out of 10?
I think so. This is a very clear and convincing case, and it's an understanding why it got so many Game of the Year nods.
Absolutely. My Skellies out of 10 are going to be a little lower. I'm going to put it right at a solid 7 Skellies out of 10.
Okay.
But that's and I'm using the full scale. This is an IGN 7 out of 10. There's something for everybody. This is 7 out of 10 is better than 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But let's hear, Will, what do you have to say about Hades?
All right, so Hades is a Sisyphean trek up out of hell with the effortlessly cool and sexy Zeg. Now don't let the accent fool you. This mama's boy is packing heat, which he'll need as you die again and again and again. So if you want a heaping amount of story with your roguelike, this is the game for you.
Can we get some applause in here? Who does the sound in here? Can we get some applause for this guy? That was awesome, man. What's your skellies out of 10? How many skellies are you giving this one?
I'm going to give this one a solid 8 skellies out of 10. I had a blast with it, so.
Awesome. I can't believe I'm the highest one on this game here on the panel. That is so surprising to me, but it also makes sense too.
Yeah, I know, Will, I had heard that you would love this game. That's kind of why I asked both of you to come on here. And Nick, I know that you're a huge fan of this as well. This was Baby's first roguelike. I mean, I've played a little bit of Zelda. That's not what I meant to say. I've played a little bit of Isaac, Binding of Isaac. I've played a little bit of Enter the Gungeon. Roguelikes are fine. Like, they don't make or break it for me. But this is the first one that I ever made considerable progress in. So, yeah. Nick, in that way, I thought your words were right on the money. This is a great one. But we'll get into all of that. Before we start, there are 2 things that I wanted to do super quick. First of all, a quick disclosure. This game is deceptively packed with content, with extra content, with hidden bosses, with bonds, with dialogue. There's so much dialogue. We're not going to get to everything. We just aren't. There's a lot of stuff that I'm sure none of us have seen. I've seen stuff that you guys haven't. You've seen stuff that I haven't. There's some stuff that none of us have. So if we miss something that you were hoping to talk about, or to hear us talk about, I should say, listeners, forgive us. It's not, we're not being inconsiderate. It's just, there's just a shitload of content here. And then the second thing is a little less important, but towards the end of the show, we are going to do some social plugging. And I highly recommend you stick around because we're going to talk not just about our socials, our Instagram, our Twitter, our Patreon, but we're also going to talk about Friday Night Gamecast, where you can find them, where you can follow them, which I highly recommend, and etc. So stick around to the end to hear all about that. Now, I've got some questions for you guys. What's your history with this game? Like, when did you find it? Did you play it on launch? Are you a newcomer to it? I've already kind of given my little spiel about it. The only thing I have to add is that I played it for the first time this year. Outside of that, what about you guys? When did you first play it? What's your histories with this? Will, do you want to start this time?
Yeah, so I didn't get a chance to play it at launch. It always looked cool, I will say, because I'm familiar with roguelikes, but I never really fell in love with them like some people did before. Seeing it, I was like, oh man, I'm not going to sit here and buy this at launch. Who knows, I'm going to play it and then hate it and waste a bunch of money. But the Greek mythology really caught my eye, so I kind of kept an eye on it. And then I want to say it was last year, I think. It was either last year or was maybe like the very end of 2021. Whenever it was on Game Pass is when I actually started playing it, because that's when I had my Xbox. And when I got my Xbox, one of the first things I started playing was Hades. It was on there. So I think it must have been at the end of 2021. Because I was like, oh, well, it's on here. I might as well check it out. Good old Game Pass, best deal in gaming. #plug, #Microsoft sponsor me. I fell in love with it, even playing on the phone before I officially got the Xbox, like at my house. I was just playing it through cloud. I had a controller that I bought from GameStop down the street because I couldn't wait. I bought Xbox Ultimate, and then I started playing it on my phone in the cloud, and I was like, this game is ridiculous how just fun it was. Even the whole point, which is dying, getting to the point of dying, I'm like, at least initially, I wasn't too frustrated. I was like, oh, that was a good run. I got another 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Yeah. I can do it again. And that's kind of how my few months went. So getting into it a little bit late, I feel like helped. It allowed people to kind of iron out some of those wrinkles, some of the early access parts that were maybe sanded down to help someone else like me, who's not like a big fan of roguelikes, kind of get more into it. But I mean, I've had a blast ever since I started playing it.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And just to reiterate a point that Will just made, this game is unfortunately not on Game Pass anymore. I think it was just very recently taken off, right?
Yeah, it was. I think they had a full-on year. So it was like for 2021 until a similar point in 2022. And then, when it went off, to everyone's obviously sadness, just because it is one of those, it's such a beautiful, beautiful Game Pass game. If you're scared of a roguelike and you want to check it out, I mean, you're already paying the $10, $11 a month, right? So go ahead and hop on there and try it. And if you don't like it, you feel like you didn't lose anything. And if you love it, congratulations. There's another diamond for you.
Nick, how about you, man? What's your history with this game?
Yeah, absolutely. So Hades came out in 2020, and I think it came out kind of as a sleeper hit. Like, people didn't really fully grasp, like, at launch, like, how big this game was going to be until kind of the media and, you know, a lot of journalists. It came out in September 2020. So it was like right before it was right in that fall window when everybody's thinking about, you know, what's going to be, you know, Game of the Year awards, and it kind of just swept the industry away with how good and how deep the mechanics and the lore and the characters and the writing in this game is, the music, everything kind of just about it seamlessly worked together. And I found about it because of the Game of the Year award, and I was like, well, I mean, if it got the BAFTA, you know, award, like, how can I not play this game? How can I not jump in there and try to get my hands on it? So I got it on the Switch initially, and I don't remember if that's because that's the only place that I saw it, or if it was because it looked like a game that would be easily portable. You could take it around, you could play it anywhere, which is true. You can. This is not a game that you need like a really intense OLED setup that, you know, that you can play. You don't have to worry too much about the performance in this game because it plays so well. I did start playing on the Switch. I put about 30 hours of my time into the Switch, and it wasn't until it came to Game Pass that I was like, okay, let me go ahead and make a transition, because I played it and then I put it down. And then Will started talking to me about Hades, and then he was playing a little bit of on Game Pass, and I was like, okay, let me just go over here. I was like, I wasn't attached to my save file on the Switch, so I was like, let me just go ahead and start a brand new run and see what I can do, see what kind of magic I can make to get past Hades, because at that point I still hadn't beaten the big man, and so the final boss of this game. So I basically went through there and I played it through it on Game Pass, which is beautiful, by the way. If you're playing it on Xbox, like, it was already pretty on the Switch. It looked like somebody had lifted a fog of glass like off of my eyeballs when I was playing it, because it was just so beautiful playing on Game Pass, and you know, the extra performance that you get from that, especially if you're playing on like PC Game Pass. So that's kind of where I went with it, and it wasn't until Will started showing me the ropes on like strategies that he was using, different types of buffs and boons that he was taking, that I was able to finally kind of push through and get through to that final boss. And yeah, I was just so happy with it at the end there. Yeah, so that's basically my history with it, and it's just stuck with me ever since. Yeah, it's stuck with me ever since, and I still can't get over the music from this game. I actually did an episode with Nave and Philip on their side show, Listening Together, which is a Patreon exclusive show. You can get early access on Patreon, but they also release it on their main feed. So if you want some more Hades content, please go over there and check that out, because we do a deep dive on the soundtrack there. And I'm happy to talk about that some more in this game too.
Oh yeah, we'll get to the soundtrack for sure.
Oh yes, thank goodness.
So, Nick, you mentioned that you played this on Switch and Xbox. Will, you had mentioned that you played it on cloud gaming on mobile and then Xbox. I played this on Switch myself. I like that we all have a little different experiences with it. But one thing that's very cool to me is that we each seem to have played this both handheld and on a proper setup, like docked monitor, whatever. This game looks phenomenal on the Switch OLED, I will say that. I haven't played it on PC or on Xbox, but on the OLED, it looks drastically better than it does docked. It's a really great handheld game. It doesn't suffer from being like docked or on a monitor, and it doesn't, suffer being handheld, but it's one of those really great instances of a pick up and go game that you can just do in bed, on the train, on the subway, whatever. And that's just super cool to me. Speaking of histories, though, before we jump into the community forum, which I'm not going to forget about, like I did in the Pokemon Snap episode, but I never told anybody. This game is centered around Greek mythology. And I wanted to ask you guys, do you have any interest, or have you ever had interest in Greek mythology? I was one of those kids that was really into it, but I got really into it not from like strictly just the lore of Greek mythology, but I was really into constellations as a kid. I had like some constellation books. My grandma gave them to me. She really liked constellations because her house, when she was still with us, is like not in like a city area. You could really see the stars sometimes. Wow. And looking at constellations with her was awesome. So I would trace constellations on a piece of paper, which is exactly what it sounds like. I would draw little dots and just connect the dots. It's very lame.
That's cool, though.
But that got
very
me.
cool. No.
Yeah, it was very nice to bond with her over that. But that was my introduction into all of this Greek mythology and learning about these gods and stuff. What about you two? Have you ever been into this kind of thing?
I am a mythology nut. So when I was a kid in like high school, middle school especially, I played video games, I get my games in, but especially at school where they had the library available, if any time I had 10, 15 minutes to spare, I'd hop over there and I would just crack open a mythology book. Generally it would be Greek. So I did get super, super heavy into Greek, but there's also plenty of Norse. I started to really expand out in high school and get more into like some Japanese mythology and some like Egyptian mythology, which was great. But Greek was always like my first. That's kind of where I cut my teeth when it comes to it. But just I treated that almost like, the Bible as far as just reading through and getting all the stories, pulling all the information. I just loved so many of the characters. And it just happened to line up with some of my favorite games like God of War at the time. So I was like, of course, I'm just like, oh, sweet. I just read about this guy and then I ripped his face off 2 days later. Oh, I'm reading about Perseus and he's dead. So it was awesome. That's why I always had to keep an eye on Hades, even if I didn't care necessarily for the roguelike part initially, is because I saw the characters' interactions. I saw that you get to talk to pretty much all the gods and they all are really, really well fleshed out. And I love the art, like we already mentioned the art there too. So it was just kind of watching the stories that I had read on paper pop out at me. And I was like, oh, this is great.
Yeah, this game is a synthesis of many things, which is a huge boon, if you'll pardon the pun, to its success. And we'll talk about that here in a bit. We'll circle back to that point, Will. Really well said. Nick, what about you? Were you also like Will and I interested in this kind of stuff in your youth?
Yeah, very similar to Will. I cut my teeth at a very early age on Greek mythology. My dad wasn't as much into it, but my mom was an absolute, Greek mythology nut, and she introduced me to a lot. Like, she cut my teeth on like the Odyssey before I was really able to read it. She would read it to me like while I was falling asleep as a kid. And so as I got older, and then I was able to read it. Yeah, I know it is pretty hardcore, but I think she curated it just enough for me when I was younger. But as I got older and I read the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Aeneid, and then just kind of fell into that and started learning about Jason and the Argonauts and everything that has to do with that point in time, that fed into my love of like Greek history and Greek mythology and how those two kind of seamlessly blend together. And then I kind of just I jumped from Greece into Rome and started learning more and more about like Roman mythology, which is even it's wonderful. It's so fascinating to me, that period of history, and I was obsessed with it, and I've done several projects both in school and out of school on kind of Greek mythology. So this was knowing that that's what the crux of this game was about the family here. I was like, you already have me sold. Just when I jump in initially.
I can imagine being armed with that knowledge as a kid, like your mother reading that kind of stuff to you made you a real threat to bullies. Like my mom said, if you don't stop it, you're going to the third way of hell if you keep this up. I'll send you to the third way of hell. Believe me, literally, I'll do it. Just don't fuck.
The lisp is accurate. How'd you know? He had a lisp as a
kid? Did you look through my footage?
It was literally a guess.
Oh man.
So, if you're a new listener to the show, one thing that we like to do that's somewhat new-ish is the community forum, wherein all of our Discord members can freely give their 1 to 3 TLDR sentences about games that we're doing, and we'll read them on the show. So that's just another perk of joining the Discord. And we've got actually quite a few for Hades here, and I'm going to read just 2 of them right now, and then I'll pepper in the rest as we go. But as before, we've got Dave First Responder Jackson, because he's the first to respond to everything in my Discord. And here's what Dave has to say about Hades. He says, I have a couple of issues with action roguelikes, and I've distilled them down to one main reason I don't get very far in a lot of them. In a lot of them, there is no real story keeping you going as you're dying repeatedly and losing motivation, or when you get the feeling you're just spinning the wheels but making no progress. I bounced on games like Enter the Gungeon and Dead Cells pretty quickly, though those are both excellent. The addition of a slowly unfolding narrative in Hades gave me the other half of the necessary motivation to keep pressing on, even as Theseus and the Minotaur were kicking my ass. Yeah, they do that. couple of this missing piece with tight gameplay and Supergiant's trademark art and music, and we've got one of the best and most compelling roguelikes I've ever played. Really glowing review from Dave there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the ass kicking that Theseus and Asterius give you, because it's a hefty one.
Two.
We've also got one here from Chris Copleen of the Retro Hangover podcast. Great show. And by the way, Dave is with Tales from the Backlog, also a great show. Here's what Chris says. I remember a lot of other people playing it, that is to say Hades. They seem to really like it. I can't speak to it myself in terms of gameplay, but I have listened to the soundtrack, and it is incredible. I should have saved that one for when we get to the music, but he is right. The soundtrack is really, really good.
It's absurd.
All right, let's talk about development a little bit. So as Dave alluded to, this was developed and published by Supergiant Games for, well, it was first on PC for Epic exclusively, and Switch in September of 2020, came to PlayStation and Xbox in August of 2021. This was in early access / development for a long time. Do either of you know exactly how long?
No, not off the top of my head.
I'm not super familiar with that.
I saw 3 years development time, but I'm not sure if it was in early access for that long. But it was in early access for a long time, and that was because they were very interested in getting feedback from players. They went with the roguelike structure due to its pick-up-and-play nature, which we'll talk more about once we get into the meat of this. Originally, this was going to be centered on Theseus, believe it or not, in the mazes of Minos, but they
That makes
felt
sense.
It does, yeah. And they felt like it was. They felt like Theseus was too generic of a character, and that it was too difficult to incorporate this branching narrative style that they wanted to implement. They settled on Hades eventually because they felt like he was underrepresented in the myths and stories due to the Olympians fearing him, and because it gave heed and gave support to this idea of a, quote, big dysfunctional family, which is a major part of the setting of this game.
And accurate to literally any other mythological story about like the Greek Olympians that you'll hear of. It's all about dysfunction and adultery and everything, how messy family can actually get, which I think is accurately reflected in Hades for sure.
Oh yeah, the stories of the Greek gods, it's just nothing but it's two things. It's family beefing with each other and family fucking each other. That's like 90% of Greek mythology.
Yeah.
It's like watching Game of Thrones, and I'm like, where have I seen this before? Oh, yeah.
I will say, though, I'm surprised that I don't know where their thought process was or what they were thinking about in the dev room about saying Theseus was a generic character, because obviously we only get like hints of who he actually is, but he's the Prince of Athens. Like, I don't know how you would I don't know how you characterize that in our modern culture as generic, but I thought it was pretty cool. So it's interesting, but I think overall it was a really smart choice for them to create their own character so they could, tell an original story. So, it always keeps the audience guessing and surprised by what's coming next with Zagreus.
Yeah, or somebody with just like a little story so you can kind of build off of it on your own.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know why they thought Theseus was generic. I'll be the first to admit that I'm not an expert, nor have I read up on any of this stuff in a long time. So outside of like the classic Theseus ship story, I don't really know a lot about him. Same with Sisyphus, which we'll get to all of these characters, but I forgot about all of the things Sisyphus did in life to make him kind of a bad guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he got his comeuppance.
He did.
Forever.
He ends up being one of my favorite characters in this game. But
I love him in the game.
We'll get to all of this. Reception, we could get over this pretty quickly. Universally praised by everybody. Mm-hmm. Many people considered this game of the year in 2020 or 21, depending on what platform they played it. This is interesting to me because I like this game a lot, but game of the year material, I'm not sure. But at any rate, it did get high 8s, 9s, and some 10s across the board. 700,000 copies were sold during early access alone. The most recent stats that I could find put this number over 1 million at this point. but those articles were from late 2020 and early 2021. So surely that has just gone up since then.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of insane that Hades is the game of the year 2020 when you think about the releases. You had Yakuza Like a Dragon, you had Last of Us Part 2, and Final Fantasy VII Remake. Like, how do you compete with those as a small, I mean, I guess Supergiant isn't small, but as an indie dev, I mean, I still classify that as an indie dev. So I think that's really interesting. And I mean, shout out to them for really breaking the mold there.
Yeah, just to clarify a little bit, I don't think that this game doesn't deserve the praise that it gets. It definitely does. There's quite a bit within it that gives me enough pause to say, like, game of the year, really?
Yeah.
And I mean, Yakuza's never been popular in the West, so that doesn't surprise me. Final Fantasy VII Remake, I don't know, like JRPGs, you don't often see that getting game of the year. Last of Us 2 is what that's what I'm shocked. That's what I'm shocked about.
I mean, I think if The Last of Us was maybe just one iota less dark, it might have been able to pull through.
Impossible.
And snag the way. He said impossible. Neil Druckmann is angry right now. He's fuming somewhere.
I was about to say, yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I like the sales numbers too, as far as what you brought up there. And I was like, I can only imagine too, with the sales numbers being, like you said, from late 2020, it's definitely gone up. But I also want to know, I mean, hopefully I'm not jumping ahead too far because I didn't read too far into the notes, but there's a little thing with a 2 on the end. I wonder how much that spiked the sales, seeing that pop up. So it's gonna be nice. Yeah.
Yes, good catch. That's not something that I had in my notes because I forgot to write it down. But Hades,
okay, well, good, perfect. I'm glad. I was like, hopefully I didn't jump ahead.
No, you're good, man. You're good. Like I said, keep me on track, steer the ship. Hades 2 was announced at the most recent Game Awards. I think everybody saw this coming. This was pretty obvious given the massive success that this game had. I actually have not read up about this very much at all. During the Game Awards, I was only kind of half paying attention because they're not really my thing, but I did want to try to win a free Steam Deck, which didn't happen.
Oh, sad.
So sad.
R.I.P. But so I missed
Milf
the
Hunter
trailer.
did, though. Shout out to him.
Shout out.
Yeah, shout out to Milf Hunter. Wasn't it shortly after that one that they started hiding the user ID of each one? And
Yeah.
it just was
Yeah.
like
That would make sense.
But yes, they did announce Hades 2. I don't know next to anything about it. All I know is that they're going to bring in, some of the Greek gods that you didn't see in here. So we're thinking about Apollo, Hephaestus, some of those folks, and that you were playing as Zagreus' sister, if I'm remembering correctly.
That's what I understand. Yep, with a cool skeleton arm.
I might be mistaken on this, but I think they're also incorporating a little bit of pagan mythology too. I don't know if they're sticking purely to Greece or if they're gonna kind of blend it together a little bit of the way that God of War might have. But it would be interesting to see how they if they even want to expand beyond Greek mythology.
Yeah, be getting some Hellblade action.
Yeah.
As soon as you said pagan, Texas put out a bill to ban it. It's going to be banned in Texas,
gone.
Utah.
It's not happening.
Sorry, this podcast can't launch in Texas, y'all.
Ted Christie is
I need
fuming
Hades
right
to
now.
have Jesus in the next one, please.
Yeah, why can't we get any of the Christian gods in this one?
Yeah, that water to wine boon is going to be crazy.
I'm going to read it one more quick community correspondence piece from Jay from Super Bracket Bros. This is his first correspondence on the show. Thank you, Jay. He says this: outside of Slay the Spire, I'd never gone near the roguelike genre. So despite the stellar reviews from just about everywhere, I stayed away from Hades for a good while. I picked it up on a random sale for my Switch, and now 300 hours later, it's one of my favorite games of all time. The story, gameplay loop, voice acting, music, customization, they're all some of the best I've ever seen in a game. All these pieces individually are great, but their cohesiveness and how they amplify each other are what make the game a 10 out of 10 for me. I can't wait for Hades 2. That's the story of a lot of people, man. They saw that this was a roguelike, I think, and they got a little scared. But going back to your TLDR, Nick, this is a great one for newcomers to the genre. And let's talk a little bit about why by getting into the mechanics. How's that for a segue? So this is a top-down isometric style, and you're progressing through screens one at a time, just like a typical roguelike. You can move, you can run, and you have a few actions. You can dash, You've got a cast, the ability to call, which we'll talk about a little later, and attacks that change depending on what weapon you choose. You've got a basic attack, a special attack, and a dash version of both. All of these can be upgraded and built upon. You have a health meter that depletes when you get hit, obviously. It's game over when you lose it. Now, what did you guys think of the combat?
It's super punchy. I love the combat. So even getting in before, like, playing it for real, you get to practice on Skelly a little bit. I was like, oh, this is kind of nice. Like, this is snappy. Like I mentioned before, I started playing on the phone with Cloud, and I expected it to be kind of like, but I was just going to let it get me through until the Xbox got to me. But even then, playing on the phone, it felt nice and punchy, getting in and actually attacking the monsters. I mean, from the start, you do good damage. I don't feel like it's the kind of game where you come in and you're like, oh, I'm tickling these things and I have to die a million times before I get to learn how to play. It's like, as far as the basic enemies go, you can get through up until, like a lot of people, the first boss, and feel like you're doing really, really well until you kind of get some sense slapped into you. But no, the combat itself felt great. You mentioned the call, which is something very early on that I did ignore. And on my like actual winning run, and then of course later on past that, I was like, oh, you kind of have to use everything. You can't just not hit the B button and think you're going to get through this game alive. So, it's really good being able to incorporate everything. The dash attacks, the fact that you can even take something like the dash, which should generally be used to kind of get out of situations, and turn it into an offensive, depending on the boons you get. I don't know. You can really tailor your style as much as the game gives you. Of course, it's all kind of random with the boons, but you can really make your own character. And there are some crazy, crazy builds that I've seen online that just don't make sense, the kind of damage you can do.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I like that you use the word punchy. I think that's a really good word to describe this combat, and I agree with you. But what do you mean by punchy exactly, if you had to describe
So
it?
for me, it's really just like being able to witness the force of your character hit other items, other characters in the game, and kind of seeing that reaction versus being more of a sponge. I would say very few things, even the bosses, especially when you get really good, very few things in this game feel spongy. There are a couple characters where you're like, oh, I'm hitting it a decent amount, but unless they're an elite with like a shield or something, the main enemies you're fighting, it doesn't matter if you're fighting 5 of the bigger guys or you're fighting 30 of the little eyeball screaming skulls. You're kind of seeing the damage chip off of them. Some of them are reacting to the hits. And of course, you're definitely reacting when you get slapped by something. Like, you feel that health dropping off of Zag when you take some unnecessary damage in a fight.
Yeah, I agree completely. It does feel really satisfying. Though you will probably die hundreds of times, especially on that first boss battle with Meg. And she beats your ass, and you say, thank you, mommy, and then you start again.
Slither on back.
That's exactly what I do every single time. Yeah, I couldn't be. I can only echo everything that Will said, because he captured it perfectly. The weight of Zagreus as he's moving throughout the arena almost felt like it's like it isn't quite there, but it's almost like playing Astro. If anybody has played Astro's Playroom on the PlayStation 5 and how the fluidity of Astro's motion and him like traversing the world and everything, them showcasing how that haptic works, it works here the same way when you're playing it on the Switch or if you're playing it on Xbox, but it's almost because of the sound design as well as their art style. The art style has almost this clean, nearly like line drawn elements to the environment and to Zagreus and the other characters, the enemies that you're in the arenas with. And I think like the reflections, the way that they use shadows and reflections in this game was super important in order to like play into how exactly, as Will said, punchy the mechanics were. And each type of boon that you get, each ability that you get can just be completely OP, or you're like suffering. You're like, why did I take Aphrodite instead of Zeus? Like you'll be in various rooms, like, kicking yourself in the head when you realize what you have to encounter. So there are RNG elements that you have to consider as you're going through it, but there are proven ways that you can get through this game. And so it does help if you want to play it, purely just on your own merit, that's fine. But it does help to do a little bit of research to see how you can play around in this game. I felt like in terms of Zagreus's base abilities and everything that he's doing there, I think what's important to keep in mind is that like the dash in the cast, I had a hard time using my caster, or even justifying using the caster when I could use that moment to, like, you know, fire off another weapon from the gun, or, you know, do a major slash attack that I could build up if I was away from enemies at that moment. So I didn't use the cast as much as I should have, and I think the call definitely I had some issues with as I was playing through. Again, I'm not the best player here, but with the call, it was like you have to build up a meter in order to do that, and you have to satisfy certain requirements that the game wants you to do before you can, you know, perform a call move, which was really cool. But yeah, if you are a love of certain types of boons in this game, like the dash and slice ability can be really, really helpful as you're making your way through the different bosses in this game.
Yeah, absolutely. There's such a high level of customization to all of this that every playthrough is going to be a little different. We're going to talk about the weapons next and then get through each of these different boons and upgrades and so forth. But before we do, did you guys have a favorite sort of playstyle, a favorite build, a favorite weapon, or something that just gave you more success than other runs? For me personally, I cleared Hades once, and then I'm in the middle of a second run. I actually met a secret boss and died to him. So we'll talk about him soon. But the general advice is that the shield is the best weapon to try to clear the game with first, because the shield gives you the ability to block and bull rush, and you could throw it. My clear, and by far the most success and fun that I had, was with the punching gloves, the punchy fists.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was my
gauntlets,
favorite weapon to use by far. I love doing that. I had boons that would knock enemies away. I had boons that upgraded the special's range, so I would just like Shoryuken across the whole map, just picking up enemies as I went. Will, I think you touched on this. The dash can be turned into a weapon too. It's really OP if you can get your dash to inflict something like Hangover or Doom wherever you land, because then you are dodging and on the offensive at the same time. Super good. As far as calls, I think I had Artemis's a lot, which was fine. But when I got Ares' call, that's when I was like, oh, yeah, this is the one that I'm using. And that saved my butt in a lot of different instances. But what about you two? Did you have a favorite build or weapon or playstyle?
For me, my favorite weapon, it was the adamant rail, the gun that you get. It has its own piece of lore that's attached to it as well, and so that was really fun. And it was one of those things that I needed to learn. And this is something that Will told me as he was talking about getting through this game. He was like, dude, as I'm watching you play this game, you're rushing around the map. He was like, you have to slow down, take your time, and plan out where you're going to move next with Zagreus as you're working your way through these rooms in order to conserve your health. Because the more you move, the probability of you running into, you know, some type of bullet hell attack or a line or you know, just an enemy in general, it increases. So, and I think that the adamant rail specifically helped me to get into that mindset where I'm like, I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to fire off this attack, and then I'm going to move over here. And as I stacked on different abilities like Poseidon's ability, the knockback, when you're knocking back enemies into the wall, does major damage itself. And then you're pairing like Poseidon with Aphrodite and her ability. And I can't remember if I know that she's not Hangover, but she has, I think her ability makes enemies do less damage to you, like halves their damage output. And so that was a really, really interesting way to go about it. But honestly, I have to say it, and I know this is going to be typical, but I loved Zeus and all of his abilities. The chain lightning is just one of those abilities where if you can buff that correctly with other boons, you're clearing maps very easily with that one. So that's kind of like where I erred.
I want to put a pin in that idea of pace of play for a second, but Will, what about you? Did you have a favorite playstyle, favorite weapon, etc.?
Yep. So my play style, and like you said, you put a pin in it, so I definitely want to talk about that afterwards as well, is like Nick said, for me, I started off playing this game super aggressive. I was like coming out hot. I was like, as many times as I can dash to get out of the way of things, the better. The, you know, stronger and faster I can punch things and hit things, the better. But really slowing down is what helped me out a lot. So to that end, Adamant Rail is another one of my favorite weapons. I did love that one. That's the one I actually cleared with once I got some of the like nuclear boons or the upgrades of the weapon rather, where you can just start dropping grenades that turn into like little nukes around the map. But I think my favorite overall weapon, especially once I fine-tuned my own movement and I got a little bit more conscious of how I was moving and the kind of damage I was doing, was the Eternal Spear. Being able to throw that through enemies and then pull it back to myself through them as well, kind of getting that double damage, felt very nice. So I think it's the kind of thing where ultimately I've seen people do really well with the sword. I think the sword might be one of those, you start off with it and it's like very straightforward, but if you want to be really, really good, that's kind of more of a master weapon because you do have to get so close. But for me, the spear was kind of like best of both worlds. Somebody got in my face, I got the spear stab. Somebody too far away, I throw the spear at him and I pull it back and I'm getting double damage. So I think the spear overall is my favorite one for sure. As far as the boons go, I do love a lot of them. I'm trying to think. I think Demeter was the one that I cleared with, so there's a special place in my heart because when you first started your run, you have the random kind of bones that pop off initially. And my first time seeing Demeter was actually at that very beginning. And I was like, oh, I haven't seen her before. Cool. I can get like a frost snap. I can freeze enemies and like slow them down. And then the rest of that run, it was just like freeze. It just felt super good. So I love her boons. Love the Ares boons. I think my favorite is the Ares dash, just leaving the little blades behind while I'm dashing around. It's kind of turning that more aggressive. So if somebody's chasing me, right, they got to get hurt to get to me and eventually they'll just die there. I think the call from Artemis is one that I got as well. And I initially was like, I'm not too hot on it until I started upgrading and realized that it would just clear rooms by itself when I hit it. So I think I ended up really falling in love with hers. And then last but not least, just the basic attack. For me, it really came down to the shield that would pop up. And I'm trying to remember. Oh my God, I don't know why I'm blanking right now on her name. Super popular. Zeus's daughter came out of her head. There you go. I remember the whole story. Came out of her head, her headache, cracked his skull open, and Athena popped out, but I could not remember the name. But yeah, Athena having the boon make your normal attack a reflection, so that if enemies were going to attack you with melee or ranged attacks, and you just hitting the A button to do damage would also reflect the move back at them, was a complete game changer. I was like, oh, then I'm never afraid to just hit the normal attack button because I'm never taking damage. And that was just like a crazy setup for me.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Will, in terms of Aphrodite specifically. And when we talk about like master elements to the gameplay, using the sword is like the hardest weapon because exactly as you said, you have to get so close with the sword. But then like combining that with, with Athena and her abilities and her boons, like that is, again, you have to know what you're doing, have this very specific setup that you're aiming for as you're going through there. Sorry, Rick, I think I cut you off there for a second.
No worries at all. We're going to talk about boons here right after weapons, but one of the OP boon combinations that I found was Athena's reflectability, but putting it onto the heart-seeking bow onto the special, so you could fire just a volley of wide shots that would reflect things, which comes in huge. It becomes a huge pro depending on what area you're in. Yeah. But these weapons, each weapon has a pro, a con, a play style, etc., and it's going to affect the pace of play. So here are the weapons. You start out with the Stygian blade. That's just the sword. You get the Eternal Spear next. And by the way, you unlock all of these in this sort of safe room before you go into the underworld via keys, and we'll talk about those too. So the Eternal Spear is next. The Shield of Chaos, get that. Coronacht, the heart-seeking bow. The Twin Fists of Malphon, it's my favorite. And then the last one you unlock, the Adamant Rail, which is a literal gun.
It's a gun.
So
I love it.
Let's grab that pin and pull it out. Pace of play. It's interesting, Will, that you found the most success in being patient, because my perception of this, and granted, this could be colored by using the Twin Fists of Malphon as a primary weapon, though I did use the bow a lot too. My perception of the combat was that it rewarded just frantic, nonstop movement. Maybe frantic's not the right word, but it rewarded perpetual motion and just always moving, always attacking, more than it did this sort of patient play style with time dodges, with really precise motions, precise strategies. So I'm curious to hear why you felt that a slower pace of play was better for you.
Yep, and I think a big part of it too is what you mentioned there. It's kind of removing that word frantic from it. Myself initially playing and then watching Nick play, since we both weren't super big into roguelikes, we were very much like, as long as I'm dodging, as long as I'm moving, I'm going to be fine, which isn't 100% the case if you're not being thoughtful with where you're moving, if you're doing it. Big boss, the first boss that we're going to talk to more, Meg, was the thing that really pushed me to start that slower pace of movement, because she's attacking you. You're focusing on her. But at the same time, there are a bunch of ads on the screen that are either walking towards you, going to melee you, or they're the little guys that are shooting things off to the side. And I can't tell you how many times I die to Meg because I'm focused on her chasing me down. I dodge away from her and I dodge directly into a big guy who then slams me for like a quarter of my life. So once I recognized that and I went online, of course I had to break down and be like, how do you beat X? And people are like, you just got to get good. But aside from that, you got actual tips from people who were more like, it seems like maybe you're going too fast, just kind of slow down. And I honestly, as slow as possible, I was dodging around, I was going crazy. My first time I beat Meg is because I would walk everywhere, because she is a character that does, the same kind of moves. You can read exactly what she's doing, and you can literally just walk away from her in certain directions and not get hit by any of her attacks. Doesn't mean if it's the giant whip that she goes to where you're at and then does like a big ball of whips. If she is raining down moves from on top of you where you see that little circle widening above your character. That's a big one that would hit me as well, is I would go to move out of the way and I dodge out of the way of the initial one, and then she'd have another one goes down, and I always was right where I was at. So literally just walking in between her orbs, it was like, I felt like I was Leonardo DiCaprio, like walking down the street just at a leisurely pace, dodging all of her moves, and I ended up beating her. I think I got hit like once or twice. So it was really just slowing down and recognizing the patterns, kind of seeing that matrix, right? Was you're playing the game, kind of seeing behind the code. And once you actually get that part down, it's more of a building block to then, as you mentioned, that thoughtful aggression, that thoughtful movement. And you can speed it up at that point. But I feel like if a lot of people don't slow down initially and just kind of read between the lines and see the enemy attacks, you're going to keep on wondering why you're being hit when you're running directly into bad guys.
As you're speaking, I had this thought. I'm wondering if the truth is somewhere in the middle. When I used to teach students who were playing music, one of the things, and I use this advice for myself too, one of the things that I would always say is think slow, play fast. So what we mean by that is whenever you're playing a really technical passage that has a lot of really fast finger movement, if you think about playing it slowly, you are going to lose that frantic energy and you are going to be more calm and more precise. And I'm wondering if that's not a good case for Hades as well, because it's not, if you're dodging frantically and button mashing, you are going to dodge, like in Meg's chamber, directly into another enemy. You are not going to be safe because you're not, you're being frantic about it. You're not being precise and thoughtful about where you're moving, which is a big punish in this game. If you're dodging and not looking where you're going, you could be in a lot of trouble. Mm-hmm. And with Hades, if you think about playing slowly but still keep that quick movement, you might have more foresight to say, oh, I can't dodge that way, or else this Gorgon is going to turn me to stone, or I can't dodge this way, or else, Meg's going to get me. So what do you think about that? Do you think that's accurate?
Yeah, I think that's really on top of it. Like that initial start was, start slow, think slow, still try to play fast, but especially think slow, maybe even start playing slow. And then as your skills get better, as you get more confidence, which I think confidence is the big thing for like myself and Nick starting, you're getting hit and you're seeing your health drop and you're like, if I die here, I have to start all over again. And I don't want to do that. Yeah, like you start to kind of just really get in your own head. But if you take the hit and then you're just like, okay, do better next time, think slower, be more thoughtful of where I'm moving, I think that's going to help you out a lot. And that allows you to then really start, playing faster, being better, but always in the back of your mind, keeping that kind of, okay, I have to be thoughtful here. So it's obviously not the same, but one of my big things that I'm still kind of struggling with sometimes is a game I'm playing now is Tetris Connect. So it's like,
love
I think it's up to speed 7 and 8. Love that game, but it stresses me out so much. It's supposed to be like a little fun, oh, I got 10 minutes, I'll play Tetris. And then that speed gets to 7 and 8 and you're like, whoa. But yeah, it just really helps to remember that, like, you look up to the right, you see the pieces that are coming, you focus at the bottom, you see where the pieces need to go. And as long as you're not watching the block fall at speed 8 or 7, then hopefully that puts you in a better mindset to actually, clear those lines. I feel like it's very similar.
Man, that game, I love that game so much. That's really a sort of like you've got to unfocus your eyes and sort of just be very present to win whenever it gets that fast.
Enter the flow state.
I feel like I have a Sharingan whenever I'm playing that game. I'm just like,
Yeah.
Before we move off of the weapons, Nick, you said that your favorite was Adamant Rail. Is that right?
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie to you. It's not my least favorite. I think ultimately the sword might be my least favorite.
Mm-hmm.
But
Same.
I don't know. Like the Adamant Rail. So picking any of these weapons, you can win, obviously, but you're rolling the dice because the boons are all RNG. You don't know what you're gonna get. The Adamant Rail has a boon that takes reloading away, so you could just continuously shoot. So if you get that, that's amazing. But with Adamant Rail, I never had any luck, man. Like,
Really?
I don't know. Like and it's funny because it's the last one that you unlock, so you would assume that it's OP. And its special is very cool. You can aim this sort of napalm-esque shot wherever you want.
Yeah, it's a grenade launcher, yeah.
yeah, grenade launcher. But other than that, man, I didn't have very much luck with this at all.
Interesting. Yeah, I think the style of combat that I was used to, or the style of combat that I used, was very much like I wanted all of the AoE perks. So definitely, leaning on some of the gods that had that, such as Poseidon or, in Artemis in some ways too, and in not Hades, but excuse me, not Achilles, the god of war.
Ares.
Please cut that out, Rick. I can't believe I just blanked on Ares' name.
It's all right. I blanked on Athena earlier, so you're fine.
Yeah. So in using those boons to leverage my movement style and my gameplay style, and really kind of like what Will was saying, like taking a moment to really assess your arena, assess the actual boss and the pattern recognition that you have for the boss. If you kind of slow down a little bit and focus on a little bit more defensive aspects, if you have boons that are going to support that style of gameplay, I think that it just kind of hit the right note for me in terms of using the Adamant Rail. Also, with the Adamant Rail, like you said, there are upgrades that you can get, and I had several runs where you don't necessarily get the hammer, which allows you to upgrade your weapons as often as other runs, but on several specific runs, especially the one that got me through to the end, I hit upgrade after upgrade after upgrade, and so I got rid of the reloading time. I turned the grenade launcher, which takes a second for it to go up into the air and then hit the ground in this big AoE. That just turned into a straight up rocket launcher. So you're just boom, 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 boom. You're doing that, and then you have splash damage effects in terms of what you're doing. And then you add on a perk like Zeus's chain lightning on top of all of the other normal base attacks as you're moving, and because you have that big one, and then you're firing it like a Gatling gun when you're sitting there, and you just want to pick off a couple of adds while you're waiting for any other type of area effects to finish. And that kind of, it excited me, and it hit me just the right notes. I swear though, I'm right on your vein, Rick, in terms of loving the twin fists of Malphon, because I just love, that's my style of gameplay. Getting in people's faces, using melee combat to get through the game. You face the same issues with the fists as you do with the Stygian blade, because you do have to get close, although there are different ways that you can modify the fists as well to do some ranged damage. And you can also leverage the cast to kind of get some stuff and, weaken your enemies pretty heavily. But yeah, so I think that, doing that on top of some of the upgrades that we're about to get into, that's really what pulled me through, and my love of the Adamant Rail. Second for me, has to be the shield too, because the shield does, like, as we've said before, allows that perfect combination of, defense, heavily on defense, and then just that right level of attack if you're able to be more methodical about things.
Yeah, you mentioned the trade-offs. One of the big trade-offs for the fists is you're trading power and speed for reach, but there's a boon that increases the range of the punch, and it turns it into, like, not quite the full length of an arrow, but like half of it, so you could punch across gaps. That's totally OP. So you could do like a Muhammad Ali build in that way, or you could go the rail, the machine gun Scarface, show me, here's my little friend kind of build.
Just light 'em up.
Lots of playthroughs, play styles. And with each playstyle and with each weapon, you get a host of upgrades and unlockables. So let's talk a little bit about that. These come in two different forms, the upgrades do. Permanent upgrades and upgrades that disappear after a failed run. So permanent upgrades, they're unlocked usually with the darkness, which is a currency, in your mirror, in your room. Temporary upgrades, they're going to be found through boons from gods and from non-gods, and through Charon's shop as you do runs. I mentioned the darkness. It's just one of several different, currencies. I think they're called artifacts, but there are a couple of them. There are keys, there are darkness, there are gemstones, there's nectar and ambrosia, there's diamonds, Titan blood, and Charon's obol. The obol is just gold. It's just gold. That's like money. But let's talk boons, because boons are a major, major part of the gameplay. These are going to be gifts from the Olympic gods or others of note, or sometimes they're just gifts, like a health increase. But they make you more powerful for that run. And accepting a boon from a person, from a god or a person of note, will deepen your relationship with that person.
Or potentially hurt it.
Yeah, yes, good call. Good catch. Good catch. These are going to make your attacks more powerful, your movement more powerful, general buffs, things like that. Occasionally, you can also get duo boons. Like if you have, let's say, a boon from Artemis, and then you get a boon from Aphrodite. I don't actually know if that's an actual combo. They can work together in that way, but generally those are a little more trouble looking for than they're worth in practical battle.
Agreed.
There's one more style of boon. It's called a chaos boon. Chaos is a character that you meet here, a god that you meet. And you get these boons by going into special chaos gates that appear randomly. It hurts you to go into these gates, and initially you get pretty hefty debuffs. But after a few encounters, meaning a chamber with enemies, after a few encounters, that debuff will morph into a really, really strong buff, more so than the typical boons from the other gods. So chaos boons are something to really look out for if you're a fan of rolling the dice and trying to break the game, which, to be honest, this game doesn't really let you break it, which is, some people call that a con against it, because, like, thinking of games like Isaac, it's really easy to break that game, like if you get a good run, but I never felt broken in this. But anywho's, boons.
I know we talked a little bit about the boons earlier, but just to kind of get on those more, just the fact that all of the gods always have something to offer. I can't really think of any of them where I wouldn't take a boon if I had a chance. There are some times where you'd see Ares versus Aphrodite, and I'm like, oh, I prefer blades to falling in, enemies falling in love with me, or, I want hangover versus, shooting some arrows. Or I think the worst thing I ever got, unfortunately, was poor Poseidon, which I love him so much, but I used to like his dash, and then I saw everyone else's, and I was like, oh, I'm never going to pick the Poseidon dash again.
Yeah.
But just the boons themselves are just so incredibly helpful. Obviously, the only way you can get through the runs. But some of those, you mentioned there, you not really can break the game. And I agree as far as other roguelikes that I've kind of seen or checked out. You really can't get super broken. But as you play later on, as you kind of unlock a couple of those, they're not debuffs, but they're adjustments, adjusters, something to that effect, where you make your runs more difficult, but it also kind of increases the chance of you getting these better boons or getting stronger items in general. You can make builds that I feel like are pretty close to broken. Like I haven't done it myself personally, but I've seen some people online. You get a couple of Athena builds, and you just stand there and you're constantly reflecting damage at enemies who just whittle themselves down and they die. So it's like, I've seen people like, how often could I beat the game by walking into a room and then just standing there until everything dies? Like it gets kind of crazy. You talk about the chain lightning there. And if you can, one, get the chain lightning boon, which you're not guaranteed, but then start to buff it as you get those, some of that currency you mentioned in the game that will actually allow you to increase the damage, increase the level of your boons. The chain lightning, if you put like 3 or 4 levels into that thing, you walk into a room full of ads and you might as well just walk out, because they're going to die the second you hit Y or X. Like it just zaps everybody. It's like you just threw a toaster into a bathtub.
Yeah.
And you bring up a good point too. You can upgrade most all of these boons. You can upgrade them by level and by rarity. Level is just going to make them more effective, like 10% versus 20% versus 30%. Rarity will kind of fundamentally change them, but always for the better, like a better version of what you have. So pretty cool. That's something to look out for.
Yeah. In terms of boons, I really heavily relied on both Dionysus and Aphrodite and pairing them up. Especially, I feel like those are really good boons that you can get whenever you're doing an introductory run through the game, or when you're trying to like feel it out, because they do help a lot, and they kind of give you a little bit more context to how the game expects you to move around. That's something that I always talk about in games, is like, breaking through that wall, as Will said, seeing behind the code, seeing the matrix there, and understanding like what is the developer asking of me to get through this game. And really, when you get down to the nitty gritty, what they are asking you to do is be very purposeful about which boons that you choose, and which boons are complementary to each other. And the more that you play, obviously you're going to die. You go into this game understanding that you're going to die because of the nature of this game. It's supposed to happen. But you go into this game and you start to realize how these boons do complement each other and how they make you more effective across the board. I really like Hermes and his ability to quicken Zagreus, even though, that sounds a little contradictory to what I was saying before, where I was more methodical about it. But as you get into different areas of this game, especially as you go to Asphodel and the Elysian Fields, the game is going to start demanding more and more from you in terms of navigating those environments, especially to considering what happens to the normal basic enemies as you go later, deeper into the game. So yeah, I think that in terms of my boons here, I mean, I had a few favorites. Obviously, as I said before, Zeus, probably something that I was always on the lookout for, but you don't get them every time. A lot of the times you'll go through a run and they'll just give you none of the boons that you really want. You'll get an Athena, you'll get an Artemis here and there, and then finally you'll break through and get something really cool like a Demeter, which is awesome. But at the same time, it's like, this, you almost like, There were plenty of runs that I did where I ended up actually just being like, this isn't the one, and just kind of taking the loss and then restarting over again to see what I can get on that next playthrough to be like, okay, this is working, this is functional for me. Because that's what you start to realize the deeper that you get into, understanding the mechanics of this game, is that as you start navigating through the rooms and the environments and facing the bosses and getting through the bosses, if you can't get through Meg or the first boss that you meet, and no spoilers yet, but the first boss that you meet on that initial level without taking, a significant amount of damage, then it might be, time to consider, hey, like, let's not even try to go to the second boss arena and try to just, start over from scratch there. I personally loved the Chaos boons. I loved Chaos as a character. I thought that Chaos, they were very interesting in terms of how they integrated in that to the game. And especially Chaos is interesting because of, you already have these challenging roguelike elements in the game, but then this is another great element that makes it harder for players. Like, if players are truly seeking a challenge, you could ignore Chaos, the Chaos portals, the entire time you play through and get through and be totally fine, never having experienced it. But Chaos is such a cool character that I thought that was it was a very interesting way that they were implementing that style. And it's like that give and take. Everything is always a give and take with Hades, and being able to get in the door, taking your health damage, and then, getting those debuffs for the first 3 or 4 rooms that you go through. And once you get out of that, if you can actually get out of that, it makes you that much stronger throughout the rest of your playthrough.
Yeah, absolutely. I took Chaos boons anytime I could. And we're going to talk about characters in just a moment when we move into visuals. You both touched on this idea of choosing a boon or, the RNG. The typical run for Hades, it's, like we've mentioned already, it's a standard roguelike insofar as you're in one room and then you clear it and go to another room. So it's room by room by room by room. When you're moving to another room, after you've cleared a room, you're going to have an option to choose between generally 1 to 3 doors. And those doors are going to have symbols above them that represent the boons. There's no key to this. You just have to figure it out, which I kind of love because it encourages you to explore and try new things. It's terrific. But that's what we're talking about when we're saying sometimes you don't get the Zeus boon. Sometimes you have to choose between this or that. You're going to see that. And that's a mechanically very satisfying thing. And that's something that Supergiant, from my understanding, does very well. This is actually the only Supergiant game that I've played. But yes, there is no shame if, you're halfway through the first floor, or the first area, or you're in the second area, and the RNG just hasn't been kind. You haven't got the boons that you want. There's no shame in just giving up, or standing in the lava and letting yourself die. There's no shame in that, because you'll get stronger if you have God mode turned on, for one, and for two, you'll get to re-roll all those dice. So no shame in that at all. As frustrating as dying can be, it's only going to make it easier for you in a lot of ways. So don't be afraid of that.
And it's funny hearing what Hypno says after you die in lava.
That motherfucker.
Yeah.
Hypnos every single time. It just hurts. It hurts.
Okay. We've been throwing the names of a lot of different characters around, so let's get into the visuals so we can talk about the characters. The art was done by Gen Z. That is that person's name, Gen Z. They also worked on Bastion. The visuals look terrific. I mean, there's just really no two ways about it. This is a really good-looking game. It is a game that is future-proof. This game is going to look good in 20 years, in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. I don't know when the great collapse of technology will happen and we're all reverted back to like cave times, but it'll look good up until then, still.
Just let Starfield come out first. I just want to know if it's good or not. And then society can collapse. That's fine.
Yeah.
Wishful thinking. I mentioned this looks great on the OLED. It really, really does. It's going to look good no matter where you play it. It's kind of cell shaded, sort of, but maybe not quite so much. It's not like Wind Waker-y, but everything, Nick, I think it was you that mentioned this. Everything has a very heavy lines on the borders. I'm not super versed in art terminology, but like the lining on everything is very crisp. The colors are very vibrant. There's never, I should redo that. There's very rarely times where enemies are blending into the environment. You're generally always going to know where everything is and what you need to hit. Not always, but generally. Yeah. It looks really good.
Yeah, the only time where you start getting into the screen getting messy, and which becomes more of a problem if you're handheld versus if you're actually docked in on a TV. The actual visuals don't look as great if you're playing on Switch, but if you're playing on something like Xbox or Steam, totally fine. The only time where things can get busy, in my opinion, is when you're in mini boss dungeons, or you're getting into an area where it's just very, very enemy heavy, and they have a lot of bullet hell styled attacks that are getting fired at Zagreus, and you're trying to move around the room, and then of course once your boons get kind of maxed out, and then those are going on at the same time as you're looking at where the enemies are, it can get a little bit clustered sometimes. But as you said, because of the way that they're using the reflections and the line art, I think somebody described it once as like a soft shade. It's not a pure like cell shaded design. That they just describe the style as soft shaded, but everything is vibrant and the colors are so crisp. And as you become more familiar with your enemies in the map, it's just like it almost feels natural as you're traversing through the world, and it feels lived in and believable at that, and lore accurate to everything that you understand if you know anything about Greek mythology.
Mm-hmm. Whether it's the Switch OLED, the Xbox, PlayStation, or even any mobile phone, really, it's going to look amazing. Because screens on phones today are incredible.
Yeah,
but nice. Now that we're into visuals, we've got two big areas to cover, the characters and the levels/areas. So let's do the characters first. We've been throwing around a lot of names, and that's because there are a lot of characters.
A lot.
Yeah. And we're going to go through them. So you've got three categories: the Olympic gods, the chthonic gods, and then everybody else.
Others.
The ones that didn't make the cut.
Yeah. The Olympic gods, you're going to meet Zeus, Poseidon, Athena, Ares, Aphrodite, Dionysus, Artemis, Hermes, and Demeter. Chthonic gods, you've got Hades, Persephone, Nyx, Charon, Chaos, the three Furies, Megara, Tisiphone, and Alecto, Thanatos, Hypnos, and yourself, Zagreus. And then the others that don't fit into those categories. Those are Achilles, Patroclus, Theseus, Asterius, Dusa, Scully, Orpheus, Eurydice, Sisyphus, and Boldy, and Cerberus. Just a quick note, Olympic gods versus chthonic gods. This is not something that I was familiar with before I started playing this game. Olympic gods, I think most of us all know. I mean, Hades. Hercules is what I'm trying to say, that classic Disney movie, my favorite Disney movie. We all learned about the Olympic gods. My understanding, just on a brief amount of research, is that the Olympic gods are understood to sort of exist and reference above the earth, like the heavens and the sky.
Yep.
The chthonic gods are more below that, so earth and below. There's like differences in how they're worshipped and everything too, but that's kind of like the general gist of it.
Yeah, and I'm on the same deal as you. Like before the game, especially, I knew of like Nyx and some of the other characters, but I didn't recognize them as kind of separate and like their own godhood. I was just like, oh, these are just other mythological characters.
Right.
So it was fun doing a little bit of a deep dive just to kind of like figure out, like, especially because dude, like, you pronounced it well. First, just hand claps for the pronunciation for a lot of those names and guys, because I was just like, what's this one?
I always called Eurydice
Eurydice. Eurydice.
It's funny you say that.
Dude.
I've heard a lot of podcasters that not podcasters in our friend group, as far as I'm aware, but like,
oh no, call them out, Rick.
I've heard a lot of people pronounce it like Eurydice. I was in a music fraternity in school, and like the whole fraternities are fucking weird, and the whole like origin of the letters and everything was the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. So I heard that every year we're doing it. So like it was cool to see them in this game. I don't like Orpheus's design at all.
I don't either.
No, really. Oh, I liked it.
I really don't,
cool.
man. Like, I don't know what it is. Like, Eurydice is cool. Like, I mean, she's got a cool design, but something about Orpheus, I don't like talking to that little dude. But that brings up a good point, is that two quick points, is that the art style of each of these characters is very unique. And the writers did a really good job of keeping things accurate to, is it appropriate to say lore? To the myths, to the actual like myths of these Greek gods. So Orpheus and Eurydice, for example, in the myth, Orpheus is in the underworld. As he's leaving with Eurydice, he turns to look at her, and that's it. That's done. Then he's failed. That's happened here. I mean, they hint at it. They're broken up. Eurydice is like, yeah, you can't count on him. And he's like, oh, I've lost my muse. I'm so sad. So they did a really good job of keeping the myths intact and accurate while making them like very approachable and likable and kind of modern. Like everybody's walking around just like, hey, lad. Hey, sir.
what's up?
Oh,
Yeah.
having a good time, sir. Freaking Dionysus is like David Bowie. He's like, what's going on, man? That's pretty cool, Zag. How's it going, baby? I
love it.
Yeah, he's like David Bowie. It's wild.
Yeah, I loved the characterization of all the gods and their different personality. I love how Zeus is kind of like this super powerful but just kind of befuddled dude who's like, Zagreus, yes, young man, we're gonna get you up on Mount Olympus and it's gonna be incredible. I wasn't aware of the difference in terms of the categorization of the godhood. In my opinion, like a lot of the mythos that I've read for Greek mythology, kind of gods are just gods, and humanity, it's like just that separation between who is immortal and who are mortal, and you don't get too deep into it. But understanding more about the chthonic gods and reading about it, of course, as Will said, I think everybody's aware of like who Charon is and Nyx, and there are a couple in here, but then learning about the Furies like Meg and her sisters, I thought that was really cool. That was something I wasn't as exposed to or really remembered a lot from what I've studied before. I knew about Hypnos before, and I think Hypnos is like probably the most lore accurate interpretation of what a little shit that character is, that god is as a person. But Yeah, I think that this game really, it thrives in the moments when it has the gods or the various personalities in this game play off of each other, especially when you go in the House of Hades and you see somebody like Meg talking to Dusa, and they're both talking about Zag and everything that's involved with that, and Dusa's relationship with Zag, or or for example, like if you're speaking and you see Meg there alone or something just after you beat her in the match, and you realize the implications of what you're doing and how Hades is going to punish her because of you and everything like that. The way that they play the personalities off of each other in this game is really incredible. And if I can break into it now a little bit, something that I alluded to a little bit earlier in the episode is there are moments in the game as you're trying to go through the maps, and you'll go into rooms, and there are sometimes where you'll see events where there are two boons in one map, and if those are instances where the Olympian gods have placed their boons there and they want to see who you like more. And whoever Zagreus picks, usually it ends in a fight that is prompted by their anger, and eventually like they say something to you, or they're like, don't expect any help from me in the future, and then you die again, and then there's another run, and everything is kind of forgiven and forgotten by those gods in the following runs and stuff. But yeah, I loved everything here, and I just loved the design. Hermes is another one. He's kind of an asshole. He's one of those characters that always is picking on Zagreus and kind of just teasing him because he's like a cousin. I think in terms of their age, they're a little bit closer in terms of what their maturity is. So I really enjoyed that.
There's a common criticism of this game that I think relates to the art style and the fact that there's a lot of flirting going around with everybody, which we can kind of touch on too. And the criticism is that this game is very horny.
Oh yeah.
That's a criticism? It's Greek.
Yeah, what were people expecting?
I don't see this as being horny at all. In fact, my note here, it says common criticism is that this game is horny. Subnote below it, no, grow up, weirdos. Like nothing about this is horny to me. Like not at all. Even Aphrodite, who is maybe the most titillating design. I mean, she's nude. She's also completely pink. I mean, her skin is pink. Everything is pink. And she's like bending forward a little bit. It's not explicitly sexual. I don't like there's just been the past couple of years this weird movement that's like anything remotely sexual in games is like horny and that's bad and we have to stop it. And it's like, what is good? I don't get it. I don't get it.
Yeah. It's like first thing first, let things be horny. Second off, like everyone needs to stop with their internet prudes. Look, I don't need what is that thing called? The Inquisition coming back in telling me I can't look at horny things on the internet. That's what the internet was made for. Everyone knows the song. We all know what the
Nobody
internet
ever
was made
expects
for.
the Spanish Inquisition.
But I'll say the main thing is it's not necessarily that the game itself is horny. A lot of the characters do have those kind of interacting, more sensual conversations. You, as the person that you talked about before with the nectar or the ambrosia, you can give them to characters and that will kind of deepen the relationship. Sometimes the relationship can evolve into something more. Sometimes it's just like, oh, thanks, friend. I appreciate this. Like we're doing it with Dusa or something like that. So a lot of people will take the fact that some characters can progress into a more romantic, or with some of the characters that we've already met, like Meg, for example, prior romance that can get rekindled with this character. So it's interesting looking back, and they assume that, it's horny. I think another big part too is we talked about how beautiful the art is. And it's not just that the art is beautiful, but realistically, everyone in the game, man, woman, floating snake monster head, everyone's gorgeous. Everyone in the game is beautiful.
Insert the Squidward meme of, oh no, they're hot.
That's exactly what it is. Oh no, they're hot. Everyone is just, all the gods, of course, themselves are just beautiful. Doesn't matter, the above and below gods. Any character that's just a normal person, Achilles, all gorgeous, all very attractive. So I think people see, a very well drawn, attractive character, and they're like, why do I like this so much? This game is trying to make me fall in love. I'm like, no, you're just attracted to beautiful men. Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations. There's a perfect clip of a YouTuber streamer that I follow, Echo Chloe. She's done some work with Kind of Funny before, but when she was playing Hades for the first time, and the first time that she chose a Hades boon, she made a very specific clip, and she was just like, oh my God, she had like a sexual awakening on camera or
heart
something
eyes.
like that. Yeah, absolutely, just like actual heart eyes when he came up on screen and started talking to Zagreus. And yeah, no, I mean, this it's like Will said, what do you expect when you're talking about a game with Greek mythology? As Rick said before, it's all about them fucking other people or keeping it in the family. So it's like, you have to, I think people don't understand how sex is tied to a lot of like, historical cultures and nations, and the fact that if that's not in this game, the game isn't as good as we are currently talking about as it is right now. It's accurate to history. It feeds into the characters, motivations and designs, and inherently, I don't think there's really anything sexual about Zagreus's interaction other than Aphrodite can be a lot sometimes,
saucy.
in terms of, a little saucy with her dialogue, but almost everyone else has a different relationship with Zag or Hades for that matter. And I think that, you just gotta let things go sometimes. Yeah. Keep the horny police off the internet.
I think my tagline for my show now is going to be what Will said. Just let things be horny.
Yeah.
Just let it be. It's fine. But we're touching on something here about building the relationships. Almost everybody in this game, you can quote unquote romance. There's a big like social sim aspect to this.
Yeah.
Which I thought was going to be bigger. Like, I'm a big fan of social sim stuff like this. I've heard all the criticism, like, that's not actually how friendships work. You're just checking off boxes, and then people say, I'm your friend now. That's fine. I agree with that. I understand it, but it's still fun to me, so I like it a lot. With this game, the way it works is when you talk to people, you gain more of their entry in your codex, which is, like your little character glossary. When you accept their boons, that's when their heart meter will, get more. When you give them nectar, their heart meter fills up. And I think you have to do that 8 times with most everybody. And then the final time is special. You have to fulfill certain conditions. And let me just say now, man, if you're trying to do this with everybody, it's going to take you upwards of like 80 runs. It is absurd how long this will take. I only maxed out my bond with one person. And it's not my favorite person because not a very hot take. Best girl, Artemis and Aphrodite. But also Sisyphus. Sisyphus is hot.
Agreed.
He's like
Agreed.
daddy mode.
All those pushing them rocks.
Exactly. I love Sisyphus, dude. But the person that I maxed out was actually Charon.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Almost entirely by
the
accident.
shopkeeper.
Such a good character in this game.
He's just such a great listener too.
Yeah, Charon doesn't talk. He just kind of moans. I gave him enough, and then all of a sudden it would let me give him the ambrosia, which will let you unlock the very maximum bond. And then the next time, it's funny because I think this is how you unlock this. The next time I was in his shop, in the back, there was this huge sack of gold. And if you walk up to it, it says, quote unquote, borrow. So I was like, okay. So you borrow it, and there's like a literal record scratch of the music stopping. And Charon just looks at you, and you're like, hey, man, like, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to like overstep. He morphs you. He takes you both into this new chamber. And Zag's like, why are you holding your oar like that? And then you have to fight Charon. And he's hard. he beat my ass.
That's really cool. I didn't
He's
even
tough.
know that he
Very
was a
tough.
secret boss
Very
in the
tough.
game. That's awesome, man.
His reach is incredible. Like his oar lets him like reach halfway across the arena. It's a tough fight. And then Hades will give you shit about it whenever you go back to him and talk. He's like, you tried to shoplift from Charon? Like, do you not have any honor at all?
Yeah. Yeah, you gotta love that.
It's crazy, dude. But all this to say, I don't mean to like go off on too many tangents. I really love all the characters in this game. Not a huge fan of Orpheus. Unpopular opinion here. Not a huge fan of Dusa either. But as for I know, I'm sorry, Will. I'm sorry.
You don't like My Chemical Romance Orpheus, and you don't like Sweet Baby Dusa.
Dusa's very sweet. It's the voice that I can't stand. They like.
Okay, I can understand
It's
that.
very clear that they like did a pitch manipulation and like
Yes.
made the voice artificially higher. It just got on my nerves. But as a character, I mean, she's very sweet little Gorgon.
I just love her interactions when she's so like flustered, and she's like, oh my goodness, Zag, goodbye. She just zooms up straight out of the chamber, and you're like, oh well, I think she likes me. Maybe I can like try to flirt with her. And she's like, I think we're better as friends. I just love the whole like round that it comes to. It's awesome.
Yeah, you can't enter a romantic relationship with Dusa. Or Charon, for that matter. Neither of those. But a lot of the other ones, Zagreus, I think, I was going to say canonically, but I'm not trying to like say in the Greek myth. But then again, like everybody in the Greek and the Romans were bisexual pretty
Everybody, yeah, let's be honest.
But in the game, Zagreus can romance men and women. It's not really commented on. It's just a thing. So you're free to do that however you want. I was actually trying to get Aphrodite, but I just couldn't figure out how to give her the ambrosia. There is a lot of different there are a lot of different things that need to happen for you to be able to give people ambrosia. Like sometimes you have to have a certain weapon, have certain things equipped. You have to have talked to somebody else first. It's it's so much. And that's why I'm saying, like, if you want to max everybody out, it's going to take you a long, long time.
Yep.
Anything else on characters before we move to the level? I feel like I talked a little bit too much throughout all of that.
I think without getting into the story, I just want to talk about how, I don't know if we talk too much about Cerberus, but Cerberus, best doggo in the game, doggo of the year for sure. But then obviously I just think it was so interesting, the relationship dynamic specifically between Zagreus, Hades, and Nyx, and how those three are intertwined. I think that their relationship and everything that's going on with that, because Nyx is the parent, basically the mother figure of Zagreus. Zagreus isn't aware of who his mom is. His parentage is one of the big mysteries of this game. And I think that, that Nyx acting as that one character who, she's the embodiment of darkness, and really, for all intents and purposes, she shouldn't have any ties to the physical realm. But you learn more later on about how Nyx was neglected by Chaos, and how in turn her relationship with Zagreus, as she saw him as this figure that she was there to nurture, and she had that opportunity, and she really took it because she realized the tension and the friction that was going on between Hades and how Hades was treating his son growing up there and not really allowing him to expand. Hades has a really weird interpretation of who Zagreus actually is, because Zagreus wasn't as successful at things that he was doing early on when he was younger. Hades kind of looked at him as kind of just uninterested or just lazy in general, until Zag really took it upon himself to be motivated to finally escape, and then he became a problem that Hades had to fix. And I think that relationship dynamic in and of itself is very real. And I thought, like, every single time you had the chance to talk to your dad, it was always like nothing is new. His opinion isn't going to change about you. And then finally, you do have a moment where you confront him. And I think that was really emotional for me too, before I absolutely got my fucking teeth kicked in, but that's something we can get to a little bit later. But yeah, that's something it just is a highlight for me for sure, is that kind of relationship dynamic between his parents there.
Yeah, that boss fight is a kick in the testicles.
Yes. Good one.
I've been sitting on that joke the whole time. I had to get it out there.
waiting to fire it off. And then last before the characters too, there's like a little part as far as just touching what you mentioned, Rick, with the kind of social sim, which I honestly have not played a bunch of previously, but I did enjoy the small part here. So when you talked about, you expecting more, maybe like there could have been a little bit more, maybe that's what it was like, since I hadn't done it before, this small taste was like, I should go check out some more others. But it's just great also coming back into, like the Hades chamber, the House of Hades, and not only just walking around as quote unquote the main character interacting with people, but walking into a room, for example, and seeing Meg and Dusa talk about, either Zag or just themselves talk about other things, seeing Nyx, talk to Dusa and be like, hey, you missed a spot over there, you might want to go sweep that up, giving you that kind of illusion at least of Hades' house being fairly lived in, these characters interacting with each other, not just about you or your escapades, your, trials and tribulations, but also just their everyday going on. At the end of the day, you're trying to escape, but this is just Tuesday for a lot of the characters down there. So, they still got to clean up and file their taxes and, feed Cerberus. So it's not always about you, Zag. There's other things going on. And I appreciate seeing that every time after like a harsh run where I get speared by somebody, walking in and just having Hades kind of chit over to Orpheus and be like, are you going to start singing yet or not? And I'm like, no, I'm too sad. I'm going to turn on My Chemical Romance.
That, yeah, anytime you come back, it's just everybody's like, oh, look, he's back again.
Mm-hmm.
But meanwhile, they're, cooking and cleaning and doing all that stuff. It does feel very lived in that way. I like it. I like it a lot. I didn't know that about Nyx, what you were talking about, Nick. Nyx. I didn't know that bit of lore, and that's something that you'll need to be comfortable with if you play this game. You're not going to learn everything. If you're a fan of wiki diving or TV tropes, man, this is the game for you, because there's just there's so much.
Yeah,
there's so much. Even if you're already familiar with the lore of like Greek mythology, it's still cool to see how it plays out here. So it's pretty neat. I'm going to put a pin in the idea of like the gameplay style changing and the back and forth between characters for a little later. Don't let me forget that, because I will forget it. But let's move on to the levels and the areas. So there are two main styles of areas, non-combat and combat. Self-explanatory. The non-combat areas, it's the House of Hades. You've got your entrance, the admin room, the kitchen, Zag's room, and Skelly's area, which is where you've got all your weapons, and you've got like a Brooklyn skeleton that's got like a comb over that's like, hey, pal, let's talk in more punching, boyo. Let's go. I fucking love Skelly.
Skelly's so good.
Awesome.
Yeah.
There are a couple of other non-combat areas, but, we've talked about Charon's shop, the end area, we'll talk about in the story. The combat. These are the four main areas that you're going to be in again and again and again and again and again. You've got Tartarus. Second stage is Asphodel. Then you've got Elysium. And finally, the Temple of Styx. Now, my question to you guys, what do you think of these? Because I'm just going to say this up front. I think Tartarus and Asphodel are okay. Mm-hmm. I think Elysium looks beautiful, but is awful with the enemies. And Styx is just awful in general. It's terrible. I think Elysium and Styx I hate them. I don't like them.
Yeah.
But what do you think?
I agree with you there. I actually find Tartarus, Asphodel, and Elysium to be the perfect triad of levels. I think that the intensity ratchets up and the difficulty, increases exponentially as you go through those three levels. I agree with you in terms of like what the Temples of Styx is. It's annoying and doesn't really thematically make sense to have, in my opinion, to have Zagreus fight there, other than the fact that they want to get one last dig in you to like deplete some more of your health right before you get to the final area, which is after the Temple of Styx. And I think it's, I don't know. I'm not a game designer, and I'm not as well versed on like what the methodology would have been for them to be like, hey, we want him to do a few more rooms here right before he can get some of those final upgrades. Because that is really primarily what this last area is for. It's for you to, clear, a certain amount. There's like three, it's kind of like a maze a little bit. There's certain rooms that you can pick to go to, and there's different routes that you can pick that will give you certain upgrades if you want to focus on something right at the very end there to really make Zagreus as buffed out as possible. But the enemies and the damage that you get in there, damage is almost unavoidable when you're in the Temple of Styx, and that was really frustrating for me. And then I also, had a little bit of issues with the currency system in this game in terms of I probably just didn't maximize it the right way, because there are points in time in the game where Hades is like, he's monitoring your progress as you're trying to escape, and he's like, enemies, destroy him. And then you get into a little like mini cutscene. It's like a I guess wave situation where you're fighting off waves of enemies, and the more that you kill during that time frame, the more money that you can get out of that specific chest that you opened. That was cool, but I think that the Temple of Styx unfortunately suffers from like, I felt like they in their minds thought they needed to add something at the end there, but I didn't think it was necessary. I feel like it should have just been that final area where we're able to like take a breather, spend whatever money or darkness that you want to buff out Zag, talk to Cerberus, and then move on. I just didn't really see the purpose of that final fight there. I was very unhappy with it, for sure.
They really inflate the difficulty here in that final area at the very end, needlessly so. It's you've got to get past Cerberus, and spoiler alert, you don't fight him. You just have to find this like stinky pile of like meat. I don't even know what it is really.
I was dismayed because when I first got to the Temple of Styx, I was like,
oh no.
I was like, there's no way I'm fighting. I said to Will, I was like, I'm quitting this game if I have to fight Cerberus because I'm not going to kill my dog. But yeah, so that was something that I was really, really happy that you just needed to grab a little thing and he loves you still and he just walks off and does his thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the way this last area works is there are, like you said, Nick, there are 5 doors you can go through, and inside one of them, randomly, is this thing that you need to give to Cerberus to get to the final boss fight. But you don't know where it is. So you're going to go through these rooms between 1 to 5 times. And that alone wouldn't be a problem. The problem is that, one, these rooms are very, very small, and they have tons of traps like spikes, saw blades, etc. And 2, the enemies are not only more bullet spongy, but they spam AoE poison attacks.
Yes.
And poison will drain your health like a sieve. It goes down so fast if you're poisoned. And this makes this last area, to me, just horrible. Because you could say, like, there's a Charon shop right outside where you can buy upgrades, but they're all more expensive now, like suddenly at the very end.
Yep.
And I had multiple boons dealing with money. I had plus 10 coins for every room. I started every run with 100 gold. And I had the perk where like vases and urns will have gold in them, like in runs.
Right.
And even still, I wasn't rolling in dough. So like, this last area is so needlessly challenging before the hardest fight in the proper game. I just don't know why they thought this was a good idea.
Yeah, it's a gut-wrenching skill check for sure. And it's like you go through, and as Nick mentioned before, it's almost like a final knife twist that the game gets before you fight that final boss, which is super, super hardcore. I mean, even it throws everything but the kitchen sink, includes the kitchen sink, and then it comes back for a second fight. So the fact that you have to go through the poison rooms, which is like anytime you have poison in a game like this, I'm like, boo, tomato, 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 you've ruined my life. Even though they give you like a little bit of antidote, you get like 1 antidote per room. I'm like, oh, thanks. I'm going to use this 5 seconds in and then be bleeding the rest of the time. But no, it's very tough. So I will agree with you there. That is my least favorite like combat area in the game. I do really like Tartarus though. I think it's Stockholm Syndrome because I was there for so many times. I just got used to it.
Yeah.
But I love it. I love how the overall architecture is for the different combat areas in Tartarus that you're going through. And at the beginning of each of those combat areas, there's like a little overlook where you can run over and hit, your interact button, and you kind of get a zoomed out view of, what the overall kind of area that you're fighting around in. So like Tartarus has a great one, you see like these kind of ghostly figures down there walking around a big old castle.
It's like an underground mountain with a huge city.
Yes.
And it looks like, just like a Greek city below the surface. It's so cool.
It's very cool. Like I said, I love I hate Asphodel, and even when I got good at Asphodel, I still hated it just because when I initially went there and realized the floor is literally lava, I'm like, no, this is absolutely not. No, I hate this. And then the only thing about Elysium, it is very pretty, but you kind of mentioned it before as far as characters and enemies not really blending in, so it being fairly good to pop out. I think that's the one place where, because the enemies are like blue and glow blue
and transparent,
and the entire world and transparent, and the whole world has like a blue tint or like a hue to it. Obviously, I see them because they're trying to kill me every 5 seconds, and they're the worst enemies in the game, in my opinion. But sometimes in the mess of them, one might sneak up behind me just because they're almost the same color as the floor. And I'm like, thanks, game. Right before I fight Theseus, before he talks a bunch of shit to me. Great.
And these areas, we talked a bunch about the Temple of Styx. Just going through them one by one real quick. Tartarus is your first area. I don't even know how to describe it, honestly. It's kind of just like the dungeon, sort of.
Yeah.
Asphodel is the second area. It's pits of fire and lava. Elysium is sort of the quote-unquote heaven of the underworld. It's where like the warriors go, and it looks very green. It's very vibrant, lots of forestry. The boss in Tartarus, that's going to be Meg at first. Put a pin in that for a second. Asphodel, it's the Bone Hydra.
Yep.
Elysium, it is what's his face? Theseus and Asterius.
Yep.
And the Temple of Styx technically doesn't have one, but you could say it's Hades, right? The very final boss.
Right.
What's weird to me is, the gameplay loop, and the game is designed for you to be doing these over and over and over and over and over again. The minimum number of runs to quote unquote beat the game is 10. So you're going to be doing each of these at the very least 10 times. You're going to be doing them way more than that. But let's say, let's make up a person that's just amazing at this game. What's weird is that when you backtrack and do runs after you die or after you're successful in Tartarus, they change the final boss. So it's not always going to be Meg. It can also be her sisters, Tisiphone and Alecto. And they're all variations on Meg's attacks. Alecto can send out, like Ares can, these spinning saw blades. Tisiphone can do double dashes, and she also shrinks the area. It's a change up, in other words.
Yeah.
What's weird is that they don't do that for any of the other areas, at all. Asphodel does not change. The Bone Hydra is always the same fight. Elysium, nothing changes in Elysium, not even the enemies. It's always the exact same. Same with Temple of Styx. It's just very strange to me that they chose to do it for Tartarus and not anywhere else.
Yes, it could be for two things. One, that is the place I think a lot of people either will get to and beat them and then possibly die, or maybe even get to that boss and die. So it's like you kind of get to see more of the changes since you're there so many times. At the very least, to beat the game, you have to go through there for sure. So you're going to hit that and see those different changes. But from what I remember, I don't think that Theseus and Asterius do have any kind of changes. The Bone Hydra is always the Bone Hydra, but it will switch up some things like the actual little bone minis that come off on the sides. They'll have different attacks. So it's like sometimes they'll have AoE, sometimes they'll do like more direct damage. And then the big old Bone Hydra itself will have like a direct beam, or sometimes he'll shoot like AoEs that kind of like arc over and shoot at you. And it changes up how his face looks. Like it'll just be the normal Bone Hydra. And I think one time I fought it, it had like a cool spiked mohawk. And I was like, oh, this looks different. And it started shooting something different. And I was like, whoa!
Yeah. But fundamentally, though, the fight is the same with the Bone
the
Hydra.
fight's going to stay the same for the most part. It's just dodging the hits and hitting the Hydra.
I fought the Bone Hydra so much because that was the first boss that gave me a lot of trouble until you learn how to do it.
Yeah.
I got so sick of the Bone Hydra by the time I was on my winning run.
Yeah, I thought the Bone Hydra, for whatever reason, that fight clicked with me way more than my fight with Meg. I think Meg is your first major skill check in the game to be like, this is how you're actually supposed to play Hades. And then you move on from there, and it's and then the Bone Hydra is you're learning more things with every area that you go through in terms of what you have to do to be successful. And in the first one, of course, as we said before, it's slow down a little bit, learn her patterns, learn her attacks, and then move around the way that you're supposed to in order to get around those. And then with the Bone Hydra, you learn that you have to start being a little bit faster using those same principles, but you have to be very quick in order to get as much damage as you can on the Bone Hydra, so you don't have to suffer through that fight for too long. Something that I'm curious about that I wanted to touch with you guys on a little bit was the mini bosses, the mini dungeon situations that you face. Each level, I think, has their own version of this, and there's a couple of really cool ones. Obviously, in Tartarus, there's one that's just a huge. It looks like a diamond. It looks like a gemstone, but it's gigantic, and it's shooting laser beams out of it. And then I hate it. Yeah, that was a terrible one. But I really, really liked the one that was in Elysium, where it's you step into this chamber, and it's you're going across the River of Styx, and it's basically just another situation where you have to fend off waves of enemy as you're going through there. But I always enjoyed that one because I think there are a couple in Elysium, and that's one of the less enjoyable ones. And then there was one time when I went through that I was greatly surprised, because whenever I'm in Elysium, obviously you get to the end and you fight the king in the Minotaur. But there was one time where I went through, and then Asterius comes out of a door, and he walks in, and he's you're not getting any farther, and he doesn't want you to fight Theseus again. And you can kind of tell there's a little bit of I guess like brotherhood there between the two of them. And so you fight Asterius, and whether or not you win against him, you obviously fight him again whenever you get into the thing. I just thought that was a really cool one. And then Thanatos, which isn't really a boss, but it's more of an encounter situation. I thought Thanatos, it was such a cool character, and the fact of like how upset he was that Zag was trying to leave and he didn't say anything because Thanatos was up, dealing with a war in the mortal realm before he had to come back to Hades. I thought that was really cool, and the fact that like they're growing up literally as brothers in the same house, and he's like, and they have a contest to see who can kill as many of these spirits when they're in the field, and whether or not you win or lose, you get like perks from it. But I thought that was really cool. Did you guys like any of those more than others?
Yeah, I really like the Thanatos running around and being able to fight. I think I ran into him twice since it's all RNG, and I never beat him. The guy's too good, so I didn't.
Yeah.
I never got a chance to actually like best him in it. But still, their interactions are great. I do love, as you mentioned, the fact that a lot of people are trying to stop Zag from going up, but it's really, in my opinion, I see like Thanatos when he's just like, bro, why are you trying to go up? Like, I thought we were boys. Like, what's going on? Like, why are you trying to go without me? So I love their relationship there and how they kind of get to interact, and seeing that, it's not just Zag going up in opposition to other people, but Thanatos is also just like, bro, why are you leaving me behind? Like, you're being a little selfish right now. I know what you're going up for, but think about your homie. So it's good having that interaction between those two there. I do really like the Asterius thing too. That happened to me, I think, after I beat the game the first time.
Really? Okay.
So I don't know if you get a chance to see that before or not, but the fact that you do go in there, you fight him a little bit, he gets about half health and he's like, I'm out. And then when you go to fight him later, that keeps that same. So luckily you go in, you don't have to refight him all the way through. He's already halfway hurt. I thought it was a very nice touch as well. I don't want to talk about the gemstone golem because I hate it a lot. And
so
every time I saw that door, I got very sad.
The thing about the gemstone golem that sucks a lot is that there's just so much going on, and it's shooting out so many lasers that it can really sap your health away. But it is preparing you for ultimately one of Hades' attacks when he shoots out these tons of lasers. And that's what these mini bosses are good about. Asterius, I like fighting Asterius before getting to the final room because, and Asterius is the Minotaur, by the way. He behaves exactly as he does in the fight. At the very end, he's teaching you how the fight's going to go, which is good because that fight with Theseus and Asterius is like aggressive. He's coming at you with an axe, he's leaping at you, he's charging at you, while Theseus is more generally going to be farther away, throwing his spear at you, and you have to dodge it. Theseus also has a shield, so you can only attack him from the back, which makes it a little difficult. Another thing that Theseus can do is call upon the Olympic gods to help him out, which I thought was going to be more of a narrative thing. I thought there was going to be more of like the gods actually are working against me. But ultimately, it doesn't come to that, really. It's just part of the game that makes it harder. But that's, and there's another mid-boss, I can't remember where, but I thought it was annoying. Oh, there's a mid-boss that comes around sometimes after I think you beat the game once called a Wretched Sneak that will disappear, reappear for a second and shoot you, disappear again, and just rinse and repeat. I found if I had the bow and arrow, I had a real tough time with this guy. I had a tough time with him in general, but and actually I don't even know if he's a mid-boss. He might just be a standard enemy, but kind of tough for me.
Mm-hmm.
Never encountered him, but I'm glad that I didn't.
What do you think? Anything else on these other areas before we jump into the music and the sound?
I think one final thing I think is really cool is when you exit, and since we've already kind of let the cat out of the bag with Hades being the final boss after you exit the Temple of Styx, I thought the walking out and seeing that the world is completely covered in snow was really cool, and we can talk a little bit about why that's the case later. But I thought that was the final boss arena is really cool because it kind of sets this very somber, demure tone to the actual fight, because Zagreus doesn't want to fight his dad. He actually, for all, despite the fact that he wants to escape Hades, like, as a realm, like, he actually still loves and cares about his dad. And so the fact that you have to, that there's the conflict that's ongoing there, it fit very thematically for me. But that's all really. I think we did a good job of covering those other areas.
Yeah, the Hades fight is so tough. It's really, really tough. I can't imagine doing this game without the max number of death defiances, because that's a real lifesaver in some of these. Mm-hmm. And the thing with the Hades fight too is he does the 2 health bar trick.
Oh,
which
God.
I don't like.
The classic Dark Souls. I killed him one time. I was like, I did it. Oh, I didn't.
Like, yay, I win.
I didn't do it.
It is a very cool fight, though. They reprised the music from the menu screen, which is a really nice touch, and it's a remixed version of it. It's very, very cool. I suppose we could talk a little bit more about the Hades fight as we're going through the story, but let's groove a little bit, and let's get into some of the music and sound design of this game. And I'm going to begin this section by reading another piece of community correspondence from Mikey Tabletop of the Big Drink Energy podcast, Indie Smash League, and etc. Here's what he says. Never played the game myself, but I heard Scourge of the Furies, which is a track in the game, in a comic shop one time, and it's a fucking banger. So any game that has a song that good in it gets a thumbs up from me.
Oh yeah.
The soundtrack in this, which was composed by Darren Korb, who voices Zagreus, is just universally well liked. It's very good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is incredible. Darren Korb, I went back and listened to a couple of the other works that he's done after kind of falling into the Hades original soundtrack, and I did some reading as to like his inspiration and where he was coming from. He used traditional Greek instruments as he was going through and creating the sounds for this game. Is something that created very much an earthy tone. A lot of those like the spooky notes that he's doing, he's using actual instruments for, and I think it comes across and it plays so well. Especially because this game is very it's a very light game. It doesn't take up a lot of data. I thought that he had a very interesting way of mixing these tracks down, and his use of the djembe as this just very light percussion beats that kind of hit every single time. The songs as you get through the game are perfectly placed in terms of the themes of when you're getting through there. A lot of these songs as you're listening to them, like Out of Tartarus, or as you get The Painful Way, for example, there are a lot of other tracks where it starts off kind of slow and methodical, and then you hit like the 3-minute mark, and it starts going bonkers, and then the drum set kicks in, and he starts going hard on the guitar, and it starts to become very prog rock, and it's spooky Mediterranean metal is kind of the perfect encapsulation of what he was going for in this.
Yeah, he uses a lot of distorted guitar. It's a very forefront instrument in this whole track, which gives it this really driving like rock or metal vibe while using some of these other instruments that are sometimes the melody, sometimes the rhythm, sometimes both. It's a heavy soundtrack for sure. It's not all balls to the wall, testicles to the wall, but it is a sort of it's very intense. Until it isn't, but it's very intense.
Yeah, I feel like the entire soundtrack itself, you can use either at the gym, studying, a little bit of A, a little bit of B, depending on, how the kind of mood is swinging. But just how you mentioned before with the actual final boss fight having, kind of the remix menu, I had never heard of any of the music beforehand. My ears weren't blessed before starting the game. So when I booted the menu up, that was my first time hearing the Hades music, and I was just like, whoa, this is the menu music? And I was like, well, we're starting off strong. And honestly, it really kept that same kind of energy. It kept that same pace as far as the strength of the music throughout the different worlds. And as the different combat areas that we previously mentioned before, everything has its own flavor when it comes to the actual music as well. I loved the reference you talked about when you stole from my homie when you were thieving and you had like the record scratch stopping the music. The fact that the music is even like kind of played in like that, oh, you did a bad thing, Zag.
It's almost a character.
It's awesome. Yep. I think so. The fact that the music is just, as Nick mentioned, perfectly placed. It really encapsulates each of the different areas very well, even in those non-combat areas like the House of Hades. Everything just feels like it fits like a perfect little puzzle piece.
For as annoyed as I got fighting the Bone Hydra so much, man, that boss theme is good. It's just so intense. It just opens up immediately with this big, distorted power chord. And, he's like, if you touch me, I'll chop off all your heads. And it's really cool. But as good as the compositions are, that's not to take away from the general sound design, which is also really good. Will, when you at the very beginning described this as punchy, as the combat feeling punchy, I thought that was a great description, not just because mechanically it feels very punchy, but when you hit something, when you hit people, when you hit the enemies, you hear this like really satisfying thunk. And it's just the whole time it's like that. It's really good, and the dash has a really unique sound to it that's very satisfying. The calls, when you pick up a boon, the sound is really, really good.
And that's what really makes, I'd say, a good game kind of go into like the greats, is when you have even something small, like you just mentioned, which kind of triggered it for me. The boons, picking up the boons, hearing that, like, the little thunder crack, like the, it feels so rewarding. Like you get that serotonin hit whenever you pick a new boon up, whenever you find an item, whenever you get one of the hammers, because you're oh man, I know what this is going to do. This is going to make the run easier. But there's always something, just kind of sound that's added to it. There's like a little trigger for you to get, like your mouth watering, to get your brain kind of ready for the damage, for the havoc that you're going to unleash on those enemies in the next room. So they did a great job. It reminds me a lot, and I bring this up a couple of times, is what got me addicted to like World of Warcraft was the ding whenever your character leveled up, and just like wanting to hear that noise over and over again. Something like picking up the boons in Hades definitely fills that kind of hole that I've had since I got off the MMORPG train.
Yeah, I think that one of the awesome elements to this game is how deep Darren Korb had his hands in the actual production and development side of this game. He is one of like the principal members of Supermassive Games. Did I get that right? Supermassive Games. Supergiant Games. And he and my understanding is that he also was the narrative director for the voice acting. So he was a narrative director and a voice director for this game, and I think that's so interesting and good because of the fact he knows and he understands at a very intimate level the themes on what every level is supposed to make the player feel or make Zagreus, feel, and the interaction that you have with there. I think that's one of the reasons why he was able to, get an actual score ready for this game and then do the sound design on top of that. That's just going to, blend everything seamlessly together. And I genuinely believe that the sound design in this game is what took it over the top, alongside of the story and a lot of the gameplay elements as well. I think the sound is really what pulled it all together to make Hades that Game of the Year contender more than anything else.
Yeah, all of these different aspects, the visuals, the sound design, the gameplay, they synthesize to be more than the sum of their parts. And like you said, that's why so many people considered it Game of the Year. And I'm glad that you brought up the voice acting, because that's something I didn't write down. Every main heavy hitter character that you're going to meet is voice acted well. Zagreus is very likable. He's just a very chill dude, kind of a dry sense of humor, which is very funny. Like he'll walk into a room and Meg will be there and she's like, I have, and by the way, I love Meg's voice actor.
Yes. And
she says, I have to kill you, right? And he's like, oh, well, I don't know. I was hoping we could come to another sort of agreement. How about it, Meg? And it's just more stuff like that. It's very good. Hades is terrific. David Bowie Dionysus is really good. Really good. Hey, Zag, man, well, come on, man. What are you doing there? And then you pop the cork. It's very good. They're all super good. Some of them, kind of blanking on some of the names, but like Thanatos, I wasn't like huge on.
Oh, really? Okay.
On the voice acting, just strictly the voice acting.
Okay.
And there was another one, a female character. I can't quite remember who. It's not Dusa, but it doesn't matter. But most of them, they're all very, very good.
It was interesting to see the versatility in a lot of the voice cast on here. Logan Cunningham, I think, got a nod for Performance of the Year because he did both Hades and the narrator and Achilles. And those are
and
like
Charon.
Yeah, and Charon. And those are all like widely just different interpretations and different like actual like vocals for each of those characters too. And I think Endearing Korb is so funny because he did Zagreus and Skelly, so he's like, having these I can only imagine what the recording booth was like when he was doing those scenes together. But yeah, no, really, really cool. I had a lot of fun with each of them and listening to them. And then Jamie Landrum, she did a couple of different characters. She was Nyx as well as Artemis. And I think those, all really like blended together perfectly. I can't really say I had a problem with any of the principal actors or principal cast there. I think that, Orpheus is just kind of a bummer overall. So I kind of let it go. And I was like, it's not that important to me. But each one kind of was individual and you knew exactly who was speaking when. And I think that they all had like a very vibrant personality to it.
Sorry, Will. Sorry for the Orpheus hate.
It's okay. It's okay. Not everybody can be down with My Chemical Romance. It's fine. I'll go paint on my black eyeliner.
Megarod tells me that you surpassed her well out there. How utterly embarrassing for her, to say the least.
I suppose you're going to punish her in some cruel fashion then?
Oh, I've already seen to that, of course. You think she volunteered to deal with you? Nobody did. That's how ignoble a task it is.
Well, strangely comforting to know.
It should be said, too, the sheer amount of voice acting is kind of absurd. Even if you're not a fan of every delivery, I mean, you're not going to hear next to any repeat lines. It's incredible just how much voice acting is in this game. Like, if you've got this boon and you talk to this person, if you haven't talked to this person, you talk to this person. If you've talked to these people and you've got this equipped and you talk to this, it's nuts. I don't know how they organize that. How would you even go about writing that? I don't even like the flow chart must be huge. I can't imagine.
Mm-hmm. And somebody was copying Bethesda for sure. They're like, all right, if you do this, if A goes B, then B goes C. If you get here before the quest starts, then they have to say this.
Yeah. No, that must have been a major undertaking in terms of planning out how those were, how those characters were going to react depending on like what the player as Zagreus does in any given moment, because it really changes everything in the dynamics and who you choose to have a higher affinity with versus others too.
All right, now as we were wont to do, we're going to end with the story. Again, for the returning listeners and for the new listeners, usually the story section takes up the bulk of everything. But with this game, the story isn't the focus. So this is going to be a brief summary. And also, it's been 2 hours of good conversation. So we don't need to, pad out the story for more than it's worth. So the main writer, the primary writer, was Greg Casavin. I believe he might be one of the head dudes at Supergiant. I'm not 100% sure. But I want to just read a quick synopsis of the plot, and then we'll talk about how we felt about it. So you are Zagreus. You're trying to escape the underworld. Of course, Hades, your father, forbids this, and he hires out contractors, shades, furies, everybody, other baddies to stop you at every floor. Your adoptive mother, you don't know that she's your adoptive mother, Nyx, along with the Olympians, they're conspiring to help you escape. The Olympians believe that you just want to go up and party with them and hang out because, the underworld sucks. But in truth, you're looking for your real mother, Persephone. You find this out through some dream sequences that Zagreus has that shows the sort of the background of what all is going on. Persephone's on the surface. She left without ever having known Zagreus. And once we beat Hades, we find her. She is shocked because she thought that we were dead. When she gave birth to us, we were stillborn, which prompted her to run away in grief from the underworld. What happened was Zeus, quote-unquote, gave Hades Persephone as a quote-unquote prize for ruling the underworld. I think that is actually Greek myth. Mm-hmm. And
a consolation
the two of them
gift.
had... Yeah. The two of them had a child. The Fates had decreed that Hades could not have an heir, so they killed Zagreus. But Nyx made a pact to bring Zag back. Zag can't stay on the surface, so he dies, and he returns to the House of Hades. This is the game's way of saying, okay, you beat the game once, now do it again. And you've got to beat it a minimum of 9 more times, which in my opinion is ridiculous,
Crazy.
to roll the credits. You basically learn that Persephone doesn't want the Olympians to find her because she doesn't like them with all the family drama. And eventually what happens after you beat the game 10 times, Persephone returns to the underworld and hosts a feast with all the other Olympians. They basically reconcile, and Zag is given a position as quote-unquote security to make all the post-game escape runs diegetically sound.
Yep.
Which I think is silly.
He's the play tester. He's the security tester for the underworld.
That is the rundown of the plot. It is drip-fed to you very slowly throughout the whole game. It is, and for all the literary folks out there, this might not be the official terminology. We've got direct storytelling in games like Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger, etc. This takes a more indirect approach where you learn about the background, the lore, what has happened through various conversations and eavesdropping. While you're learning about somebody's day and what they like, they might reveal, oh yeah, back when your mother was here. And then you might say, my mother, wait, what? Nix? Yeah. And then they're like, oh, forget I said anything.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. That's how you learn. It's more of an indirect approach, which I really like. What I do not like is that they felt that they needed to bloat this out into a 10-run minimum to get the credits, which is going to be way more than 10 because you're going to die. And then way more if you want to unlock everybody's bonds and really learn everything about them. It feels absurdly bloated in that sense, in my opinion. But I didn't invite you guys on here to listen to me talk. I invited you to have you talk. So what's your take on this, man? Do you feel it's bloated? Do you like the story? Do you like the drip feed approach? How do you feel about this?
Yep. I got to say that it's bloated for sure. For me, at least, I know it's bloated in a lot of good ways, and there are quite a few bads. It's tough not being a complete lover of the roguelike genre. I think what Supergiant did was try to meet people in the middle as much as possible. And of course, the big thing that people talk about, one of the selling points here, is that it is a game where the actual gameplay, the fact that it's a roguelike and you're expected to die and that you need to go through multiple times, plays into the story. I think you brought it up earlier, Rick. If somebody was just a master at this kind of game and they played through 10 times perfectly, beat Hades all 10 times, and then, beat the game, I can only imagine that you're not going to get the full story out of it. You're definitely not going to get all of the characters' interactions and everything. So they expected people to die, to get to a certain point and lose, to even beat the boss and lose, or rather, get towards the end and lose to the boss, etc. So it's really playing the gameplay into the story and trying to make them as intertangled and as woven as possible. By doing that, you're never going to hit it 100%. And I think that's where the 10 wins to actually roll the credits on there comes into effect, because I think the average person, probably the three of us in here especially, is this was fun. It took a long time to get that one. I don't know if I'm going to do this 9 more times. But if somebody came in, or maybe this is their first roguelike and they fell in love with it, they're like, oh, I can't wait to try out this new boon, or increase my skill with the Stygian blade. I can't wait to do XYZ. We talked about it too, I think a little bit, but it's after you beat the game, there are additional modifiers to say, okay, I beat the game once. Now I'm going to make enemies do more damage. Maybe I'm going to do less damage. There are more enemies on screen, and you start that before your runs. And then you are rewarded with I think it's a currency you get if you actually go through and beat the whole thing with those kind of debuffs on your character. I can't remember off the top of my head, but just being able to tailor the game more to how you want, the difficulty you want. You also brought up God mode earlier, which, hey, if this is baby's first roguelike and you're really, really struggling, throw on God mode. That way, when you die, you have these buffs that continue to be permanent and stay and increase the more you die. So it's you kind of have to win at a certain point. So it's bloated in that way, as they try to please everybody. And as we just know from kind of reviewing things, interacting with different entertainment, you're not going to please everybody if you try to please everybody. That's just the unfortunate way it works. There are some edges that you kind of need sharp, and trying to please everybody, unfortunately, will sand them off. But ultimately it's enough here for people to really enjoy, whether you're into the social sim, whether you're just into the roguelike, whether you're just into looking at very pretty people interacting. There's a lot here for you to really kind of sink your teeth into, and at least getting that one win in, you know, going all the way through, beating Hades, talking to your mom for the first time. I think even if you just do that and stop, you're going to have a good time with it, and you're going to get some really good meat out of this game.
For sure. And what you mentioned about, you know, even if you beat it in just 10 runs, you really aren't going to learn the full story. I beat this on my 32nd escape attempt, and I was learning new stuff up until the end. And then whenever I went to Wiki Dive today and Subreddit Dive, I was learning new stuff then too. So it's very clear, like they expect you to play this if you want the full story over and over. And there are people on the subreddit when I was poking around that are just super into that, like just getting good at the game.
Yeah.
And, you know, getting, like, my run took 35 minutes when I completed it. They getting sub 20, like down to 15, 12 minutes, like just these insane times.
Wild.
And there are like, that's not my thing. That is not a language that I speak, but it seems like Supergiant catered to you, if that is you. So good on you. There was another thing that I was about to touch on, but I forgot it. So I'm just going to back away. I don't know. Nick, what do you think?
In terms of what you were saying about it being bloated, I see what you're saying. And I in the same way, Rick, I crave to know the full picture. So yeah, there were times where I definitely, you know, to prep for this episode, I went and I did the wiki deep dive and learned more and more about, you know, the characters and their dynamics and the interactions and their affinities and everything that's involved there. But I'll also say that, you know, learning the story maybe isn't even the point of this game. As Will was saying, like, I think they meet you in the middle for almost every single type of roguelike, any other roguelike out there. I love the fact that we're in this place now where games like Celeste and Hades are going to give you modes for folks who are either maybe a little older, their reaction times aren't as snappy, or younger folks who, you know, just aren't accustomed or have never been introduced to, you know, more difficult roguelike / Dark Souls, you know, styles games, that this is the expectation, and that, you know, they take the stigma away from dying, and I think that is important. And the fact that they are interweaving the story as much as they are with death, and the fact that you as Zagreus are dying every time, and you learn more from each death, whether that's, you know, canonically from the story that they're setting up, or purely about how am I supposed to approach this boss, or how am I supposed to approach this room. I think that constant progression loop is the secret sauce. It is the key to this game. And I think that in terms of looking at it from a bloated perspective, I went into this game with the knowledge that you have to do 10 runs, and I was like, I'm not spending that much time on this game. We have so much other content to get through, and I think that's just the downfall of podcasters, is that, you know, balancing the content and the production. But I think that for normal and average players, there are going to be the folks who are the hardcore roguelike fans who are going to sink the 80 to potentially even 100 plus hours into this game to, you know, get that full scope, to get that full picture. It never bothered me, though, that I didn't know enough, because the mystery element was enough of an incentivization for me to be like, hey, that was really cool. Let me go through another run so I can get some more nectar or some more ambrosia or what have you to give to that god, so I can get just that extra little piece of flavor context. Learning about the relationship between Zagreus and Achilles and all of that, or the relation, or the floundering relationship that turns into new love of Zagreus and Megara. Like, those are perfect examples of stuff where it's like you're scratching the surface on what the entire picture is, and there is still mystery there to, like, what Zagreus is waiting to find out about Persephone and everything, and what's going on with the Olympian gods in general. But I think that it's perfectly balanced, in my opinion. So I feel like I am differing from the group there in terms of that, but I do recognize that if you that similar to Three Houses, you know, you want to know what the full picture is at the end of the day, and the fact that you have to go through that much work to get it is a little bit, you know, egregious. There should maybe be considerations about being like, oh, let's give them the full picture in the first run, and if they want to get all of the deep lore, then that's going to be like runs, you know, 2 through 10. So I don't know what the solution to that is, but I think that I do love the story in general. The ending, especially, of the gods coming together and reconciling with Hades, and you see that final picture of Hades and Persephone back together, and you finally see Hades happy for the first time and not buried under a pile of paperwork, and Zagreus holding his dad's staff. Such a cool image, such a cool picture that you get to walk away with this game.
That is interesting that you say that, because if I put in the 10 clears to get the real ending and realize that it was just a happy family get together, a happy ending, I would be pissed.
Really?
I don't like the I don't know why. Like, why is this such a happy ending? That's not Greek mythology.
I guess.
Oh, yeah.
Greek mythology is not a happy thing. Everybody's
Usually not.
suffering and dying. If they're not fucking, they're suffering and dying. I mean,
That's the human condition.
Yeah.
God, yeah, yeah. I that's just my opinion. I think though that regardless of how you feel about the story, that you are right. It's not 100% the draw, but it is there for folks that want to dig into it. As is the super deep lore, if you really want to max everybody out and take the 100 runs to do so. Oh, by the way, the thread that I had forgotten, God mode is good. The game does not condescend to you about it. It just says, hey, here it is if you need it, if you want it.
And I had it
that's
turned
cool.
on. Easy mode.
Oh,
for
me
the
too.
win.
Me too, dude. Me too.
Will's like, I couldn't be me.
It couldn't be me, but I also don't like myself, so it's fine. It's okay. I make things punishing for no reason.
Final piece of correspondence before we head out for the day is from Haig himself in the Discord. He says, I'll be honest, there have only been 2 roguelikes that I've played that have really stuck with me. First was Bastion. Great story, great graphics, fun gameplay, awesome story, better music. Had a lot of fun. Buddy recommended Hades to me, and I'm so thankful he did. It had all the same things I loved about Bastion. Graphics, amazing. Gameplay, superb. The weapons and abilities choices, they were all incredible. The amount of available boons and power-ups was plentiful. Music, killer soundtrack that keeps thumping. Story and VO work, just simply on another level. I couldn't wait to come back to the house sometimes and talk with all of my peers, enemies, and mentors. No line of dialogue ever seemed to repeat. Come to find out later that Supergiant made both games, that is Bastion and Hades. Can't wait for Hades 2. All in all, this was an amazing game and everyone should take a stab at it. Had to save that one for last, not just because it was a glowing review and because it was a little on the longer side, which is perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine. But what a way to cap it. This has been a big podcast, and I wanted to go out on a glowing review of the game. So, fellas, we did it.
We did it.
The one. Yep.
Absolutely.
There's our completed run. It only took 2.5 hours rather than 30 or 40.
Yeah,
I don't
take
actually
that,
know.
speedrunners.
Yeah.
I didn't look at my Switch time clock to see how long this took me.
Oh, I don't even want to. Jeez.
Yeah, I
think
didn't
about how
either.
long it took
I
me
was
to get that
actually
first
trying to
W.
find my hours logged because my hours are going to be a little bit separated between the Switch and the Xbox. But yeah, I want to check out and see how much I've sunk in there.
Now that we've arrived at the end, first, if you're still here, thank you for listening. This would not be possible without you. So we do this for you, and we thank you. Before I plug my stuff, I want to give Nick and Will a platform to talk about their show, Friday Night Gamecast. We've talked about it at the beginning just a little bit, but now we're going to talk about it a little bit more. I was on, as of recording, the most recent episode, and it was a lot of fun. We talked about my stupid life, but we talked about Xenosaga as well. This new Fireside series is just Nick, but if you go back a little further back, you can hear Nick and Will together. Fellas, I'm going to let you talk more about your show, but I also want to hear your personal recommendation for where a first-time listener should start.
let you kick it off, Nick.
Absolutely, yeah. So for us right now, yeah, as you said, we are in the middle of our fireside chats. We're just at the tail end. Rick, your episode was the penultimate episode, and we got another one next week, and that is going to be with Liv and Frui, from Between Two Gamers. And as this episode is probably going to come out a little bit later, that episode is going to be on The Last of Us, which is one of my personal favorites and theirs as well. So really excited to kind of break into that and see what folks' reception to that was. Also, by the way, Rick, we don't talk a lot about this enough, but there was an overwhelmingly positive reception to Xenosaga in the episode there. So I was very surprised by that because of my lack of understanding and the obscurity of the Xeno series, but I was pleasantly surprised by how much people enjoyed and liked that episode. So shout out to them. At the end, as we enter the fireside chats and you go back and you go take a look at our season 1, a lot of people really like our Game of the Year episode. I think Will and I did a really quick fire Game of the Year episode. It's going to be like right around 2 hours. That is a wonderful place to start because it's the perfect encapsulation of what we are on the show and what we do. It's a little bit different in the format because our focus was on Game of the Year, but it is our dynamic there 100% and our take from 2022. So if you want to know where we stand on games, that is the perfect place to go and then check it out and then go through our catalog and pick whatever topic that's really interesting to you and jump in there. We have some really great reviews as well as generalized just discussions on video game topics, whether that's news, industry rumors, or issues that people are experiencing in gaming. Will and I cover it all. I have a lot of favorites, but Will, do you have any favorites you want to point people to?
Yeah, I want to say I'm probably going to do the podcasters, like not faux pas, but the antithesis of what most people say. Go listen to our first episode. That's something that I'm honestly very proud of. We've had people tell us how they thought the first episode was us either being on podcast before or having some kind of official formal training, but it was just me and my pal goofing around, me and my best bud over here just kind of starting this amazing podcasting journey, which along with folks like Rick here at Pixel Project and other incredible guests that we've had on our show, that we've been on their show. It's just been a great journey so far, and I think starting at that kind of bottom level with us, starting at the ground and kind of working your way up through our catalog is a really nice place to start at. So I'd love to hear more people talk about that first episode and just be like, I came into the first episode and I was blown away. I just had to keep on listening. So I'd recommend y'all to check that out for sure.
Yeah, whether it's gameplay reviews like Control or more broad topics like video game pricing and difficulty, there's a lot to offer from Friday Night Gamecast. And listeners can look into the show notes to see these links, but where can they find you on social media if they wanted to hang out or engage with you?
Yeah, so we're primarily on Twitter. That's where I interact with most of our community and our fans is on Twitter. We are the Friday Night Gamers, and that's spelled Friday normally, and then NITEGAMRZ. And of course, I'll give Rick our link tree, and you can find us on all platforms. Of course, you can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We love any feedback there, any type of rating or reviews, but yeah, you can find us there, and we love engagement. So if anybody has any thoughts and wants to reach out to us personally, Twitter is the place to start, and our DMs are open, and we'd be happy to talk with you.
You gave me a moment of panic. I was like, Friday Night Gamers, have I been saying this wrong the whole time?
No.
Nah.
It's just our Twitter handle is terrible, and I have to honestly pick a new actual handle that makes more sense, like Friday Night Pod or something like that. So yeah, we'll figure it out.
I appreciate that, boys. I really do. It's a good show. It's a great show, and I recommend that everybody here check it out. If you're a fan of this show, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to be a fan of Friday Night Gamecast as well, and of the Friday Night Gamers, which is YouTube.
Yes, sir.
Look into
vice versa.
Look into the show notes if you want to find these links. Their link tree will take you to the RSS feed, the Twitter, the Instagram, all of that good stuff, the Patreon, all of it. You can find all of it there. Now, if you want to find us, that is Pixel Project Radio on the interwebs, you can do it also on Twitter and Instagram. You can just search us by name and we come up both ways. It's all good. We do have a Discord, which is where a lot of our hangouts happen. If you wanted to give some of the community correspondence little TLDR reviews a try, you can do it there. That's also where you're going to get news on the show, unpopular opinions, things like that. It's a really fun time. That link will be in the show notes as well, as will the link to our Patreon page. Listen, I like Patreon because it's money. There's no getting around that. Money is cool. but to not be facetious for a moment, paying artists for the work that they create is good. Period. There's not an argument against it. We really appreciate everybody that has donated to the Patreon. You heard a little bit about it in the intro, but if you want to check that out, you can do so at patreon.com/pixelprojectradio. We have a bunch of different tiers, as low as $2 a month, and you're going to get things like voting power to decide on games, schedule in advance, bonus episodes, and more, depending on what you're looking for. So again, you can do that at patreon.com/pixelproject. Wowie. Patreon.com/pixelprojectradio. And before we end for today, we did get a new review, and it is our policy here to read all of the reviews on the show. We've got one from The Barber Who Games. That is Bill Barber over at the Gaming and Collecting Podcast. Another great show, by the way. Very impressive collection of video games, too. It's kind of crazy. Bill says this: 5 stars, an excellent and informative gaming podcast. Out of the many gaming podcasts out there, Pixel Project Radio is a must listen, including a wide variety of different topics combined with a deep dive structure, helped by great interaction from the hosts. Would definitely recommend. We recommend your show too, Bill. Bill's a great guy. I don't interact with his co-host Alex too much, but they're both awesome. It's a good show. Check it out. And most importantly, I wanted to do 3 thank yous, I suppose. First to Nick and Will for sticking around for 2.5 hours talking about video games. It's a fun time, but we know time is precious, even if there is no escape. And I do appreciate both of you for sticking around. And thank you, listeners, new and old, for hanging out with us too. So, once again, Nick, Will, thank you guys for stopping by.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. We're happy to be back anytime.
That's right. As you just heard, I am Rick. It's true. Haven't changed. And I'm signing off for today. We'll see you next time, everybody. Take care.
See ya.